Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Fish Lake National Forest. I'm Logan Hayes, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. I'd been living off-grid for 3 years when I decided to take my renovated Airstream deeper into Utah's backcountry than I'd ever gone before. After my divorce and the subsequent breakdown that cost me my engineering job, I'd bought the vintage trailer and converted it into a mobile homestead. Solar panels, water filtration, composting toilet, ham radio, everything I needed to disappear from civilization for months at a time. Fish Lake National Forest seemed perfect. Over 1 million acres of wilderness, much of it barely touched by human feet. The kind of place where you could park your RV at the end of some forgotten logging road and not see another soul for weeks. That's exactly what I was looking for. The trouble started before I even reached my intended campsite. My GPS began glitching around mile marker 47 on Forest Service Road 142. The screen would flicker between showing my location correctly, then placing me hundreds of miles away in Nevada, then displaying nothing but static. I'd invested in a high-end Garmin unit specifically for remote travel, and it had never failed me before. Probably just interference from all the rock formations, I muttered, pulling out my paper maps as a backup, but when I unfolded the Forest Service topographical map, the lines seemed to swim before my eyes. Roads that should have been marked weren't there, and new ones appeared that I was certain hadn't been on the map the night before when I'd planned my route. I pulled the Airstream over at a wide spot in the dirt road and stepped out to clear my head. The August heat hit me like a physical weight, despite being at nearly 9,000 feet elevation. Pine trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their branches creating a canopy so dense that the forest floor lay in perpetual twilight. That's when I heard it for the first time. A sound like fabric tearing, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. It lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped abruptly. I stood perfectly still, listening, but heard only the whisper of wind through pine needles and the distant call of a hawk. I should have turned around then, should have hooked up the trailer and headed back to the main highway. Instead, I convinced myself it was just a branch breaking or maybe an elk moving through thick underbrush. I'd been living in the wilderness long enough to recognize most sounds, and this was probably nothing. The road continued climbing for another 8 miles before I found what looked like a decent campsite. A clearing perhaps 50 yards off the main track, hidden behind a stand of aspen trees. It was perfect. Level ground, a fire ring someone had built from local stones, and a small creek running nearby. Most importantly, it was invisible from the road. I spent the rest of the afternoon setting up camp with practiced efficiency. Solar panels angled to catch the last few hours of sunlight, water lines connected to my filtration system, and the ham radio antenna extended to its full height. By sunset, I was sitting in my camp chair with a cup of coffee, feeling more at peace than I had in months. The first night passed without incident, though I woke several times to the sound of something large moving around the perimeter of my campsite. Each time I grabbed my flashlight and checked outside, I found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. Just the endless wall of pine trees and the feeling that something was watching me from beyond the reach of my light. Morning brought relief and embarrassment in equal measure. Of course, there were large animals moving around at night. This was their home, not mine. Black bears, elk, maybe even a mountain lion. All perfectly normal wildlife that would naturally be curious about the strange human who'd parked a metal box in their territory. I spent the day exploring the area on foot, following game trails deeper into the forest. The trees here were ancient, massive ponderosa pines that must have been saplings when the first European settlers crossed the continent. Their trunks were so wide I couldn't wrap my arms around them, and they rose so high their tops disappeared into the canopy above. It was during this exploration that I found the first sign that something was wrong. About 2 miles from my campsite, I came across what looked like another clearing, but as I got closer, I realized it wasn't natural. Something had torn down the trees. Not cut them down with tools, but physically ripped them from the earth. Massive pines lay scattered like toothpicks, their root systems exposed and caked with dark soil. The destruction covered perhaps an acre, and at the center was a perfect circle of bare earth where nothing grew. I approached cautiously, camera ready to document what might be storm damage or some kind of geological event. But when I reached the edge of the destruction, I stopped cold. Tracks, dozens of them, pressed deep into the soft earth around the fallen trees. They looked almost human. 5 toes, an arch, a heel, but they were wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. Too long, too narrow, and the toes ended in what looked like claws. I took pictures of everything, though later I would discover that none of them came out clearly. Just blurred images that could have been anything or nothing at all. The walk back to camp felt longer than it should have, and I found myself checking over my shoulder constantly. The forest seemed different now, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. Even the familiar weight of my .45 pistol on my hip didn't provide its usual comfort. That evening, I tried to call my ex-wife Sarah on the satellite phone. We'd divorced on bad terms, but she was the only person who knew approximately where I'd gone. It seemed important suddenly that someone know exactly where I was. The call wouldn't go through. The phone showed full signal strength, but every attempt ended in static or dead air. When I tried the ham radio, I got the same result. Nothing but white noise on every frequency. I was completely cut off. The second night was when things started to get truly strange. I'd gone to bed around 10 p.m., exhausted from the day's hiking and unsettled by my inability to communicate with the outside world. The Airstream's aluminum walls were reassuring, solid, familiar, civilized. I'd upgraded the locks on both doors and installed security screens on all the windows. It was as safe as any house. I woke to the sound of my own voice. "Logan," it said, muffled by the trailer's walls. "Logan, are you in there?" I sat up in bed, heart hammering. The voice had come from outside near the front door. It sounded exactly like me. Same cadence, same slight rasp from years of smoking. Same Massachusetts accent I'd never quite lost despite a decade in the West. "Logan, I need help," my voice continued. "I'm hurt." I grabbed the pistol from my nightstand and crept toward the front of the trailer. Through the small window beside the door, I could see a figure standing just at the edge of my LED camp light's reach. It was tall and thin, wearing what looked like hiking clothes, but something about its posture was wrong. It stood too straight, too still, like a mannequin positioned by someone who'd never seen a real human being. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me, Logan," the thing replied, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It wasn't just using my voice, it was perfectly mimicking the inflection I would have used in that exact situation. I fell down by the creek. I think I broke my leg. I pressed my face to the window, trying to get a better look at whatever was out there. The figure raised one arm in a greeting that was almost natural, almost human, but not quite. The gesture was too fluid, like someone had learned to wave by watching videos and copying the motions without understanding the purpose. "Logan," it said again, "why won't you help me?" I backed away from the window, pulse racing. Whatever was outside, it wasn't me. It wasn't human at all. But it knew my name, knew my voice, and somehow it had learned to imitate both with disturbing accuracy. For the next hour, the thing circled my trailer. I tracked its movement by the sound of footsteps on the pine needles and the way its voice seemed to come from different directions as it walked the perimeter of my camp. "Logan, I'm cold," it would say from the left side of the trailer. Then, minutes later, from the right, "Logan, why are you hiding from me?" And from behind, "Logan, let me in. I just want to get warm." Always my voice, always that perfect mimicry that should have been impossible. Around 3 a.m., the footsteps stopped. The forest fell silent except for the hum of my refrigerator and the distant sound of the creek. I stayed awake until dawn, pistol in hand, listening for any sign that the thing was still out there. When the sun finally rose, I unlocked the door and stepped outside with my weapon drawn. The campsite looked normal. too normal. The fire ring, the camp chairs, my outdoor table, all exactly as I'd left them. No footprints in the soft earth around the trailer, no disturbed pine needles, no sign that anything had been there at all. But I knew what I'd heard, and when I walked to the creek to fill my water containers, I found them. Tracks in the mud beside the water. The same impossible footprints I'd seen at the destroyed clearing. Almost human, but fundamentally wrong. They led from the creek to the edge of my campsite, then seemed to simply disappear. I should have left then. Should have hooked up the trailer and driven straight back to civilization. Instead, I convinced myself I was having some kind of breakdown. Stress, isolation, too many months alone in the wilderness. It was affecting my perception, making me paranoid. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be a logical explanation. I spent the day trying to restore my communication equipment. I climbed the tallest tree I could find and repositioned my ham radio antenna. I moved the satellite phone to different locations around the campsite searching for a signal. Nothing worked. It was as if some kind of electromagnetic field surrounded the area, blocking all transmissions. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that everything was normal. Whatever I'd heard the night before had been a dream, or maybe some kind of echo effect from the canyon walls. The tracks by the creek could have been made by any number of animals. My mind had simply filled in the details, creating patterns where none existed. I was making dinner on my camp stove when I heard the first scream. It came from the forest to the north of my campsite, a sound of pure agony that raised every hair on my body. Human, definitely human, though distorted by distance and the acoustic properties of the dense trees. Someone was in trouble. Real trouble. I grabbed my flashlight and first aid kit and headed toward the sound. The scream came again, closer this time, and I broke into a run. Branches whipped at my face and roots tried to trip me, but I pushed forward, following the cries for help. "Here," I called out. "I'm coming. Where are you?" "Help me," came the reply, and my blood froze. It was my voice again. The thing was using my voice to scream. I stopped running. In the beam of my flashlight, the forest looked alien and threatening. Every shadow could hide something watching me, waiting for me to come closer. The screams continued, moving away now, deeper into the woods, but I no longer felt any compulsion to follow. Instead, I backed slowly toward my campsite, keeping the flashlight trained on the trees around me. Something was trying to lure me into the forest, using my own voice as bait. It had learned that mimicry worked, and now it was adapting its strategy. I made it back to the trailer just as the screaming stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the sounds had been, a quiet so complete it seemed to press against my eardrums like physical weight. Inside the airstream, I double-checked the locks and drew all the curtains. My hands were shaking as I loaded a fresh magazine into my pistol. Whatever was out there, it was intelligent, it was learning, and it wanted me to leave the safety of my trailer. The third night was when I saw it clearly for the first time. I'd been dozing fitfully in my bed when movement outside the window caught my eye. Something pale was walking around my campsite, just barely visible in the starlight filtering through the trees. At first glance, it looked human. The right height, the right general shape. But the proportions were wrong in subtle ways that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. It moved with unnatural grace, as if its joints bent in directions human joints couldn't. Its skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over a frame that seemed too thin to support its height. And when it turned toward my window, I bit back a scream. It was wearing someone's face, not metaphorically, literally wearing it like a mask. The features were human but didn't quite fit right, as if someone had taken a photograph of a face and tried to stretch it over an incorrectly shaped skull. The eyes were the worst part. Black holes that seemed to go on forever, reflecting the faint light like an animal's eyes, but with an intelligence that was utterly alien. The thing approached my window and pressed its face against the glass. Up close, I could see that what I'd taken for skin was something else entirely. A patchwork of different textures and colors, sewn together with what looked like sinew. It was wearing pieces of multiple people, fashioned into a rough approximation of humanity. Logan, it whispered, and I could hear my own voice clearly through the thin aluminum wall. "I know you're watching me." I forced myself to remain perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. The thing's impossible. Eyes seemed to look directly at me through the darkness of the trailer's interior. "I can smell your fear, Logan. It smells like copper and salt." It stayed at the window for what felt like hours, sometimes speaking in my voice, sometimes in voices I didn't recognize. Men, women, children, all perfectly mimicked, all pleading for help or trying to convince me to open the door. "My name is Sarah," it said in a woman's voice that made my heart stop. It was my ex-wife's voice, exact in every detail. "I'm lost, Logan. I came looking for you and got lost in the woods. Please help me." I knew it wasn't really Sarah. She was back in Massachusetts, probably asleep in her new apartment with her new boyfriend. But hearing her voice, so perfect in its mimicry, nearly broke my resolve. For a moment, I actually reached for the door handle before rational thought reasserted itself. The thing outside laughed. Not in my voice or Sarah's, but in something that might have been its own. The sound was like glass breaking in reverse, sharp fragments reassembling into something that hurt to hear. "You're learning," it said, back to using my voice. "Good. That makes the hunt more interesting." Hunt. It had called this a hunt. As dawn approached, the thing finally moved away from my window. I watched it walk to the edge of my campsite, then do something that defied every law of physics I understood. It simply folded. Like origami in reverse, its impossible anatomy collapsed in on itself until nothing remained but a shadow that slipped between the trees and vanished. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night. I sat in my kitchen with the pistol in my hands, staring at the door and windows, waiting for it to return. But the forest remained quiet until the sun rose and painted the pine needles gold with morning light. The fourth day was when I discovered I wasn't the first person to encounter this thing. I was checking my solar panels when I noticed something glinting in the trees about 30 yards from my campsite. Investigation revealed it to be the remains of another RV, a smaller Class B van that had been hidden behind a dense thicket of pine saplings. Judging by the rust and vegetation growing through its wheel wells, it had been there for years. The van's side door hung open, revealing an interior that had been turned into a survival shelter similar to my own. Solar panels on the roof, water tanks underneath, ham radio antenna still attached to the bumper. Whoever had owned it had been living the same lifestyle I was. On the dinette table, I found a journal bound in water-stained leather. The entries were written in a careful hand, dated 3 years earlier. July the 15th. Found a perfect campsite in Fish Lake, no other humans for miles. Finally, some peace. July 18th. Something's been walking around the van at night. Probably just wildlife. July 22nd. It spoke to me. Used my dead brother's voice. Knew things only Tommy would know. July 25th. Tried to leave, but the roads keep changing. GPS doesn't work. Radio's dead. I'm trapped. July 30th. It's wearing faces now. Pieces of different people stitched together like a quilt. How many has it killed? August 3rd. I think it's getting tired of the game. Last night it just stood at the window and stared at me for 6 hours. Didn't say a word. August 7th. Ran out of food yesterday. It knows. It's been leaving pieces of meat outside the door. I think they're human. The journal entries ended there, but loose pages were scattered around the van's interior. I gathered them with trembling hands and continued reading. Can't tell if it's been days or weeks. Time moves wrong here. The sun sets in the north sometimes. Found bones in the forest. Human bones arranged in patterns. It's building something. I understand now. It doesn't just kill, it collects. Voices, faces, memories. I think it's trying to become human. If anyone finds this, don't try to help me. Just run. Get as far away as you can and never come back. The final page was nearly illegible, written in what looked like blood. It's not hunting me anymore. It's studying me, learning. I think I'm going to be the next face it wears. I dropped the journal and stumbled backward, my mind reeling. The thing outside my trailer wasn't some random predator or supernatural entity. It was a collector. It had been here for years, maybe decades, gathering victims and learning from them. Each person who wandered into its territory became raw material for its transformation. The van's owner had been trapped here just like me. The roads that changed, the communications blackout, the feeling that time moved strangely. It was all part of the thing's hunting ground. It had created a pocket of reality where it could play with its prey at leisure. I searched the rest of the van but found no sign of its owner. No body, no clothing, no personal effects beyond the journal. It was as if the person had simply vanished, leaving behind only their vehicle and their desperate final words. But in the van's bedroom compartment, I found something that made my blood run cold. A mirror mounted on the wall, and written on it in what looked like lipstick were the words, "It's wearing my face." I ran back to my own trailer and began packing immediately. I didn't care if the roads were wrong or the GPS didn't work. I had to get out of here before I became the next entry in someone else's journal. But when I tried to start my truck, the engine wouldn't turn over. I popped the hood and found that someone, or something, had methodically destroyed every wire and hose under the hood. The damage was too precise to be random vandalism. It had been done by something that understood exactly how to disable the vehicle. I was trapped. The sun was already setting by the time I accepted my situation. I was stuck in this place with a creature that collected faces and voices, that had been perfecting its hunting technique for years. The only consolation was that it seemed to prefer a long game. The journal entries suggested its previous victim had survived for weeks before disappearing. But I wasn't going to just sit there and wait to be collected. I spent that evening turning my campsite into a fortress. I dragged fallen logs to create barriers, set up motion-activated lights around the perimeter, and rigged my camp stove to create a makeshift flamethrower. If the thing wanted me, it would have to work for it. As darkness fell, I sat in my trailer with every light on and the pistol in my lap. I'd loaded hollow point rounds. If the creature was as physical as it appeared, bullets might actually hurt it. I wasn't going down without a fight. The attack came at midnight. I heard it first as a scratching sound on the trailer's roof, like fingernails dragging across aluminum. Then the scratching became pounding, rhythmic, and deliberate. The entire trailer shook with each impact. "Logan," called my voice from above. "Why won't you let me in? I'm so cold." I aimed the pistol at the ceiling and put 3 rounds through the aluminum roof. The pounding stopped immediately, replaced by a sound like something large sliding off the trailer and hitting the ground. Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then laughter from outside, not my voice this time, but the thing's own alien sound. "Good," it said. "You're more interesting than the last one." He just hid and cried. The motion sensors began triggering one by one as the creature circled my campsite. I watched its progress on my battery-powered security monitor, a pale shape moving with inhuman speed, sometimes upright like a man, sometimes low to the ground like an animal. When it reached the camp stove I'd rigged as a weapon, I triggered the ignition remotely. A gout of flame shot 6 feet into the darkness, and I heard the thing let out a shriek of pain and rage. The smell of burning meat drifted through my trailer's ventilation system. "That hurt, Logan," it said, and now its voice carried a note of genuine anger. "You shouldn't have done that." The assault that followed was unlike anything I could have imagined. The creature attacked my trailer from every angle simultaneously, pounding on the walls, clawing at the windows, trying to pry open the door. It moved faster than my eyes could follow, appearing at one window just as I turned to look at another. I emptied the pistol's magazine, shooting at shadows, knowing I was probably wasting ammunition but unable to stop myself. The thing's laughter echoed from every direction, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my bones. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The scratching, the pounding, the alien laughter, all of it ceased as abruptly as if someone had thrown a switch. I crouched in my trailer's kitchen, breathing hard, listening for any sign of the creature's presence. "Logan," called a familiar voice from outside, and my heart nearly stopped. It was my father's voice. My father who had died of cancer 5 years earlier. "Logan, son, what are you doing in there?" "You're dead," I whispered. though I knew the thing could probably hear me through the thin walls. "I know this is confusing," my father's voice continued, patient and loving just as I remembered it. "But I need you to open the door. I need to explain what's happening to you." Tears ran down my face as I listened to that impossible voice. The thing had somehow learned not just the sound of my father's voice, but his mannerisms, his way of speaking. It knew exactly how to hurt me. "I'm proud of you, Logan," the creature said in my father's voice. "Proud of how you've survived out here on your own. But it's time to come home now." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the words seemed to come from inside my head. "Remember when you were 8 and got lost in the woods behind our house? You were so scared, but I found you. I'll always find you, son. That's what fathers do." The memory was real. I had gotten lost in those woods, and my father had spent hours searching for me in the darkness. It was one of my most vivid childhood memories, and the creature had somehow accessed it. "Open the door, Logan. Let me help you." Instead, I reloaded my pistol and put 3 more rounds through the side of the trailer where I thought the thing was standing. The voice stopped immediately, replaced by a hiss of pain and anger. But it wasn't done with me yet. Over the next several hours, the creature used the voices of everyone I'd ever cared about. My mother, begging me to let her in because she was scared. My ex-wife Sarah, apologizing for the divorce and asking for another chance. My college roommate Mike, laughing about old times and suggesting we grab a beer together. Each voice was perfect in every detail, carrying emotional weight that hit me like physical blows. The thing wasn't just imitating these people. It was accessing my memories of them, using my own feelings as weapons against me. By dawn, I was emotionally exhausted and nearly out of ammunition. The creature had stopped its direct assault on the trailer, but I could still sense its presence in the forest around me, waiting, watching, planning its next move. I knew I couldn't survive another night like that. The thing was wearing me down systematically, using psychological warfare more effectively than any physical attack. It had learned that my emotional connections to other people were my greatest weakness, and it was exploiting them with surgical precision. But it had also made a mistake. In using the voices of people I loved, it had revealed something important about itself. It wasn't just a mindless predator, it was lonely. It collected faces and voices because it wanted to be human, to have connections and relationships. Its mimicry wasn't just camouflage, it was a desperate attempt to understand something it could never truly possess. That gave me an idea. I spent the 5th day preparing for what I hoped would be my final confrontation with the creature. Using supplies from both my trailer and the abandoned van, I constructed a trap. If I was right about the thing's psychology, it might actually work. As sunset approached, I stepped outside my trailer for the first time in days. "I know you're out there," I called to the darkening forest. "I know you can hear me." Silence for a long moment. Then, from the trees, "Finally ready to come out and play, Logan?" It was using my voice again, but something had changed in its tone. The perfect mimicry was starting to slip, taking on inflections that were utterly inhuman. "I want to make a deal," I said. Laughter echoed from multiple directions. The thing was moving through the trees, circling my campsite. "What kind of deal?" "You want to be human, don't you? That's why you collect faces and voices. You're trying to learn what it means to be one of us." The laughter stopped. I touched on something important. "You don't know what I want," the creature said, but its voice lacked conviction. "I think I do. You've been alone out here for decades, maybe centuries. You've watched humans come and go, and you've tried to understand what makes us different from the animals. What makes us connected." A rustling in the bushes to my left. The thing was getting closer. "You can take my face, my voice, even my memories," I continued. "But you'll never understand what it really means to be human. Because being human isn't about how we look or sound. It's about the connections we make with each other." "Shut up," the creature snarled, dropping all pretense of human speech. Its real voice was like wind through dead leaves, ancient and terrible. "You want to know what it's like to be human? Really know? Then stop hiding in the shadows and let me see you." Not wearing someone else's face? Show me what you really are. For a moment, I thought I'd miscalculated. The forest fell completely silent, as if every living thing was holding its breath. Then, slowly, something emerged from the tree line. It was tall, at least 7 feet, and impossibly thin, like a scarecrow stretched beyond reason. Its limbs were too long, jointed in places where joints shouldn't be, and its skin wasn't skin at all. It was a patchwork of different textures and colors, stitched together with crude surgical precision. Pieces of humanity collected over the years, worn like a grotesque costume. But it was the face that nearly broke my resolve. Or rather, the absence of one. Where features should have been was a blank expanse of gray flesh, smooth and featureless except for 2 black holes where eyes might have been. "This is what I am," it said in its real voice. "This is what you wanted to see. You're beautiful." I lied and saw the creature's head tilt slightly in confusion. "You're lying." "No," I said, taking a step closer. "You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Because you're unique. You're not trying to be human anymore. You're being yourself." The creature's head tilted further, processing this unexpected response. "In all your years of collecting faces and voices, has anyone ever told you that before? Has anyone ever seen the real you and called it beautiful?" For the first time since I'd encountered it, the creature seemed uncertain. Its impossible anatomy shifted nervously, the patchwork skin rippling like water. "They run," it said quietly. "They always run. I'm not running." I took another step closer, close enough now to smell the decay that clung to its stolen flesh, close enough to see the intelligence burning in those black, empty eye sockets. "What's your name?" I asked. The question seemed to confuse it. "Name? What do you call yourself? Not the names of the people you've taken. Your name." I don't. Everyone needs a name," I said gently. "Even you. Especially you." And that's when I struck. While the creature was distracted by this concept it had never considered, I triggered the trap I'd spent all day preparing. High-tensile steel cable, looped around the creature's ankles and connected to my truck's winch. The motor engaged with a loud whine, and the creature's legs were yanked out from under it. It hit the ground hard, thrashing and screaming in that voice like breaking glass. The cable held, barely. I'd used the strongest steel cable I could find, but the creature's struggles were already causing it to fray. "You lied!" it shrieked, trying to claw its way free. "You lied to me!" "No," I said, backing toward my truck. "I meant every word. You're beautiful, in your own way. But you're also a killer, and I can't let you hurt anyone else." I had maybe 30 seconds before the cable snapped. I used them to douse the trapped creature with every drop of gasoline I had. From my generator, my camp stove, even the emergency fuel I kept for my truck. The thing's struggles became more frantic as it realized what was about to happen. "Please," it begged, cycling through dozens of different voices. "Don't do this. I can change. I can be better." "Maybe you could," I admitted, pulling out a road flare. "But I can't take that risk." I lit the flare and threw it. The creature's screams as it burned will haunt me for the rest of my life. Not because they were inhuman, but because in those final moments they sounded genuinely, heartbreakingly human. As if, in its agony, it had finally found the connection to humanity it had been seeking all along. The fire burned for hours, fueled by the creature's oil-soaked patchwork skin. I sat in my truck and watched, making sure it was really dead. As dawn broke over the pine trees, nothing remained but a pile of ash and charred bone fragments. When the last ember died, I started my truck. To my amazement, it ran perfectly. Whatever had been wrong with the engine was gone, as if it had never been damaged at all. My GPS came online, showing my exact location with perfect accuracy. The ham radio crackled to life, filled with voices of truckers and emergency services on channels that had been silent for days. I was free. I drove straight to the nearest town and called the FBI from a payphone at a gas station. I told them about the abandoned van, the journal, and what I'd found in the forest. I left out the supernatural elements, of course, but I gave them enough information to launch an investigation into what I described as a serial killer's hunting ground. They found the van exactly where I said it would be, along with the remains of at least 12 different people scattered throughout the area. The case made national news for a few weeks, the Fish Lake Forest murders, before fading into the background noise of American tragedy. I sold my trailer and moved back east to a small apartment in a crowded city where I'm never alone. I took a desk job with an engineering firm, something that keeps me indoors and surrounded by people. I haven't been camping since. But sometimes, late at night, I hear my own voice calling to me from outside my apartment window, soft and pleading, asking to be let in from the cold, and I wonder if I really killed that thing in the forest, or if it somehow followed me home. I wonder if it's still learning. I wonder if, by showing it what human connection truly meant in those final moments, I taught it something that made it more dangerous than ever. And I wonder if, somewhere out there in the darkness, it's wearing my face and using my voice to lure other lonely people into the woods. Sometimes I think about going back to check, but I know I never will. Because deep down, I'm afraid of what I might find. And I'm even more afraid that when I find it, it will smile at me with my own face and thank me for teaching it how to be human. Logan Hayes still lives in Boston, where he works as a consulting engineer. He has not returned to Utah. The FBI investigation into the Fish Lake Forest murders was officially closed in 2019, though some evidence remains unexplained. No similar incidents have been reported in the area since Logan's encounter. However, park rangers in neighboring forests have noted an increase in missing person reports over the past 2 years. The missing individuals are typically solo campers or hikers who were last seen entering remote areas alone. In each case, their abandoned campsites have been found undisturbed, as if their occupants simply vanished into the wilderness. And in each case, other campers in the area have reported hearing familiar voices calling to them from the darkness, the voices of loved ones who couldn't possibly be there. I never believed in the stories they told about Gifford Pinchot Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams. I'm 34 years old. And what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. Sarah and I had been planning the RV trip for months. After 3 years of marriage and endless city stress, we needed to disconnect. Really disconnect. No cell towers, no Wi-Fi, just us and the wilderness of Washington State's Gifford Pinchot Forest. The 32-foot Winnebago we'd rented felt like a palace on wheels, complete with a full kitchen, queen bed, and solar panels that would keep us powered for days. "Look at this place," Sarah whispered as we pulled into the remote, dispersed camping area 40 miles from the nearest town. Ancient Douglas firs towered overhead, their canopy so thick it filtered the afternoon sunlight into cathedral beams. The forest floor was carpeted with moss and fallen logs, creating a green sanctuary that felt untouched by time. I maneuvered the RV into a clearing beside a babbling creek, the perfect spot we'd scouted on satellite images weeks before. No other campers for miles. Exactly what we wanted. "GPS says we're here," I announced, though the screen had been acting strange for the last hour, showing us on roads that didn't exist and estimating arrival times that made no sense. Sarah stretched as she stepped outside, her auburn hair catching the dappled light. "God, smell that air. When's the last time we breathed something that wasn't exhaust fumes?" The silence was profound. Not the dead quiet of the city at 3 a.m., but a living silence filled with subtle forest sounds. The creek's gentle murmur, wind sighing through branches, the distant tap of a woodpecker. It felt peaceful, sacred even. We spent the first evening like honeymooners again. Sarah made her famous camp chili on the RV's stove while I set up our outdoor chairs and strung LED lights between the trees. As darkness fell, we sat by our small campfire, sharing stories and wine, feeling more connected than we had in years. "No work emails," Sarah said, raising her glass. "No deadlines, no traffic. No neighbors playing music through thin walls," I added, and we clinked glasses under a canopy of stars brighter than any we could see from our Seattle apartment. The first night passed peacefully. We made love in the RV's surprisingly comfortable bed and fell asleep to the sound of the creek and wind in the trees. I woke once around 3 a.m., thinking I'd heard voices outside, but when I peered through the small window, I saw only darkness between the trees. The second day brought adventure. We hiked a trail that started behind our campsite, following the creek deeper into the forest. The path was well maintained but seldom used, marked with occasional blazes on trees. Sarah had always been the outdoorsy one in our relationship. Rock climbing in college, marathon running, always pushing me to be more active. I was content to follow her lead. "Look," she said, pointing to a massive fallen cedar that created a natural bridge across the creek. "We have to cross it." "Have to?" I laughed. "Pretty sure we don't have to do anything that involves potentially falling into freezing water." But she was already testing the log with her foot, arms extended for balance. That was Sarah, fearless in a way that both thrilled and terrified me. I followed reluctantly, trying not to look at the rushing water below. On the far side, the trail became fainter, marked only by sporadic cairns, small stacks of stones left by previous hikers. The forest felt different here, older somehow. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead until we walked in perpetual twilight. "How long have we been hiking?" I asked after what felt like hours. Sarah checked her fitness tracker. "Says 4 miles, but that can't be right. We've been walking for 3 hours." I pulled out my phone to check our location, but the GPS showed only a blank gray screen with the message, "Location unavailable." No signal bars, not even for emergency calls. "Mine too," Sarah said, checking hers. "Probably just the tree cover." We turned back, but the return hike felt longer somehow, as if the trail had stretched while we weren't looking. By the time we reached the fallen cedar, the sun was setting, painting the forest in shades of orange and deep red. "Did we make a wrong turn?" Sarah asked, looking at the log bridge. "This doesn't look right." She was right. The fallen cedar was positioned differently, angled upstream instead of down. The bank on the far side looked steeper than I remembered. "It's just the different light," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. "Everything looks different at sunset." We crossed back to our campsite as darkness fell, guided by the glow of our solar lights and the smell of the fire I'd banked before we left. But when we emerged from the trees, something felt wrong. The RV sat in the same clearing, but our campfire was completely cold. Not just burned down, cold ashes, as if it had been extinguished hours ago. The camp chairs I'd left by the fire were now arranged in a perfect circle around the dead coals. "Did you move the chairs?" I asked. Sarah shook her head. "Maybe the wind." But there was no wind. The forest was perfectly still, eerily quiet. Even the creek seemed muted. Inside the RV, I tried to restart the fire while Sarah prepared dinner. The lighter worked fine. The kindling was dry, but the flames kept dying out, as if something was stealing the oxygen from the air. After 20 minutes, I managed to get a small fire going, but it burned with an odd blue tinge that cast strange shadows on the surrounding trees. "The stove's acting up, too," Sarah called from inside. "Burner flame keeps guttering out." We ended up eating cold sandwiches by the weird blue campfire, both of us on edge but trying to maintain the illusion of a romantic getaway. "Tomorrow, we'll drive to that ranger station we passed," I said. "Make sure we're in the right place." Sarah nodded, but she was staring at the tree line with an expression I'd never seen before. Wary, almost predatory, like a deer sensing a wolf. That night, the voices started. I woke to what sounded like Sarah calling my name from outside the RV. "Mike? Mike, come here. I need to show you something." I reached for her beside me, but my hand found only empty space. The bed was cold where she should have been. "Sarah?" I called softly. "Mike, come outside. You have to see this." Her voice came from somewhere near the tree line, maybe 50 feet from the RV. I pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt and stepped outside barefoot, the damp earth cold beneath my feet. "Sarah, where are you?" "Over here, by the big tree." I followed her voice into the darkness beyond our solar lights. The moon was new, providing no illumination, and I had to feel my way between the trees. "Sarah, I can't see you. Come back to camp. Just a little further, Mike. It's amazing." Something in her voice stopped me cold. Sarah never called me Mike. She'd called me Michael since our first date, said Mike sounded too casual for someone she was falling in love with. It was one of the small intimacies that made our relationship special. I backed toward the RV, and as I did, I heard her voice again, from inside. "Michael, where are you? Come back to bed." I ran, burst through the RV door to find Sarah sitting up in bed, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You look terrified." "You were calling me outside, from the trees. I've been asleep. I just woke up when the door slammed." I told her about the voice, about how it called me Mike instead of Michael. Sarah listened with growing concern, then pulled me close. "Probably just a dream," she said. "You were sleepwalking, maybe?" But I hadn't been dreaming. I could still feel the cold earth under my feet, still hear that wrong voice echoing from the darkness. The next morning brought no relief. I woke to find our water tank empty, though it had been full the day before. The electrical system was acting up too. Lights flickering, the refrigerator cycling on and off randomly, the radio picking up stations that played nothing but static interspersed with what sounded like whispered conversations. "We need to leave," I told Sarah over instant coffee and granola bars. "Something's not right here." She was standing at the RV's small window, staring into the forest. "Look at the trees," she said. I joined her at the window. The massive Douglas firs that had surrounded our campsite were different, positioned differently, with different shapes. Where yesterday there had been a dead snag about 30 feet from the RV, now stood a healthy tree with green branches. "It's not the same place," Sarah said quietly. "This isn't where we camped." I grabbed the keys and tried to start the RV. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, just made a grinding noise that echoed through the forest. I tried again and again, pumping the gas pedal, but nothing. "Maybe it's flooded," Sarah suggested, though we both knew that made no sense. I popped the hood and pretended to know what I was looking at. The engine looked fine, no obvious problems, but when I tried to check the oil, the dipstick came out clean. Not just low, completely dry as if the engine had never held oil. "This is impossible," I muttered. That afternoon, the storms moved in. We'd seen no weather forecast, heard no thunder in the distance, but suddenly the sky turned black and wind began whipping the treetops. The first lightning strike hit so close we felt the ground shake, and the thunder was instantaneous. A sound like the world splitting open. Sarah and I huddled inside the RV as the storm raged. Lightning struck again and again, always close, sometimes hitting the same tree multiple times. The air smelled of ozone and burning wood. Then, in the space between two thunderclaps, we heard it. My voice calling from outside. "Sarah, help me! I'm hurt!" Sarah started to get up, but I grabbed her arm. "That's not me," I said. "Michael, please. I think my leg is broken." The voice was perfect. My tone, my inflection, even the way I pronounced Sarah's name with a slight emphasis on the second syllable. But I was sitting right beside her. "Don't go out there," I whispered. The voice moved around the RV, sometimes calling from the front, sometimes from the back. "Sarah, why won't you help me? Don't you love me anymore?" Lightning flashed, illuminating the windows, and for just an instant, I saw a figure standing beside the RV. It looked like me, same height, same build, same clothes I was wearing, but its face was wrong, features slightly off, like a photograph that had been subtly altered. "Jesus Christ," Sarah breathed. "What is that thing?" The storm continued for hours, and through it all, the thing outside kept calling in my voice, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry, sometimes sobbing. It knew things about our relationship, intimate details that only Sarah and I shared. "Remember our first apartment?" it called. "How the neighbors complained about us making noise. You said you didn't care. You were too happy to be quiet." Sarah's face went white. That conversation had happened in private, in our bed, whispered between kisses on a Sunday morning 3 years ago. As dawn approached, the storm finally moved on, but the voices didn't stop. Now we heard both our voices calling from the forest, sometimes together, sometimes separately, having conversations we'd never had. "I think we should leave Michael," Sarah's voice said from somewhere in the trees. "Why?" my voice answered. We just got here. Something's wrong with this place. I'm scared." "Don't be scared, baby. I'll protect you." The real Sarah was pressed against me, trembling. We listened to these doppelgangers discuss our fears, our plans, our relationship with an accuracy that was horrifying. "We have to get out of here," Sarah whispered. "Walk if we have to." But when we stepped outside, we discovered the trail we'd hiked the day before was gone. Not overgrown or hard to find, completely absent, as if it had never existed. The creek still flowed past our campsite, but now it ran in the opposite direction. "This isn't possible," I said, walking to where the trailhead had been. There was a clear path right here. The forest stretched in all directions, thick and pathless. No sign of human passage, no blazes on trees, no cairns. Just endless wilderness that seemed to shift when we weren't looking directly at it. We spent that day trying to find our way out, following the creek both upstream and down, looking for any sign of the access road we'd used to reach the campsite. But every direction led deeper into the forest, and by evening we were back at the RV, exhausted and more frightened than ever. That night, Sarah disappeared. I woke to find her side of the bed empty, the RV door standing open. Outside, I could hear her talking to someone. "I've been waiting for you," she said, her voice soft and dreamy. I peered out the door and saw her standing at the edge of the clearing facing the tree line. In the moonlight, when had the moon become so bright? I could see another figure partially hidden behind a large cedar. "Sarah," I called. "Come back inside." She turned to look at me and her face was wrong. Not obviously different, but wrong in the same subtle way as the thing that had worn my appearance during the storm. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. "Go back to sleep, Michael," she said. "I'm just talking to our friend." "What friend?" "Sarah, there's no one there." But there was someone there. I could see the figure more clearly now. Tall, pale, dressed in clothes that might have been hiking gear or might have been grave shrouds. Its face was a shifting blur, features that wouldn't hold still. "He's been waiting for us," Sarah said. "He wants to show us something beautiful." She started walking toward the figure and I ran after her. But the moment I stepped off the RV's small stairs, the world tilted. The ground felt spongy under my feet, and the trees began to bend and sway without wind. "Sarah, stop!" I reached for her, but my hand passed through empty air. She was there and not there, solid one moment and translucent the next. The pale figure gestured for her to follow, and she walked toward the tree line like a sleepwalker. I tried to follow, but with each step they seemed to get further away, until finally they disappeared between the trees. I searched for hours, calling her name until my throat was raw. The forest echoed with her voice calling back, but always from a different direction, always just out of reach. "Michael, where are you? I'm lost." "Michael, help me. Something's wrong. Michael, don't leave me alone." But when I followed the voices, I found nothing. Sometimes I caught glimpses of her between the trees, her red jacket, her hair catching moonlight, but she was always moving away, always just beyond reach. As dawn broke, I stumbled back to the RV, defeated. Maybe she'd returned while I was searching. Maybe this was all some horrible nightmare. But the RV was empty. I sat on the steps and tried to think rationally. Sarah was an experienced hiker. She knew how to take care of herself in the wilderness. She'd probably gotten disoriented in the dark and would find her way back when the sun came up. Except this wasn't normal wilderness, and the things I'd seen weren't natural. Around noon, I heard her calling again. "Michael, I'm back. I found something amazing." Her voice came from the forest behind the RV. I went to investigate and found her standing beside the creek, but something was immediately wrong. She was wearing the same clothes from the night before, but they were clean and dry despite a night in the forest. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup fresh. "Where have you been?" I asked. "Exploring. There's so much to see here, Michael. So many wonders." She smiled, and it was Sarah's smile, but not Sarah's smile. Too wide, showing too many teeth. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." "Why would we want to leave? This is paradise." Her voice had a strange quality, like an echo of an echo. When she moved, she seemed to lag slightly behind herself as if I was seeing her through water. "You're not Sarah." The thing wearing her face tilted its head with curious amusement. "Of course I'm Sarah. I'm your wife. Don't you recognize me?" It was perfect. Her voice, her mannerisms, even the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall. But her eyes were wrong. Too bright, too knowing, like looking into deep water at something that was looking back. "Where is she?" I demanded. "I'm right here, Michael. I've always been here." The Sarah thing reached for me and I backed away. Its hand felt cold through my shirt, and where it touched, my skin began to itch. "Don't you want to stay with me? Don't you love me? Where's my wife?" "I am your wife." It smiled again, and this time I could see that its teeth were too sharp, filed to points like a predator's. I ran. Behind me, Sarah's voice called out, hurt and confused. "Michael, where are you going? Why are you running from me?" I made it to the RV and locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't keep that thing out if it really wanted in. Through the small windows, I could see it standing by the creek, perfectly still, watching me with its bright, terrible eyes. For the rest of the day, it stood there, waiting. As evening approached, I heard more voices. My voice, Sarah's voice, the voices of people I didn't recognize. They came from all directions, whispered conversations, arguments, pleadings, laughter. The forest filled with phantom sounds until the air itself seemed to vibrate with stolen words. The Sarah thing never moved from its position by the creek, but I could feel it watching, patient as stone. Night fell, and the voices grew louder. I covered my ears, but I could still hear them. Inside my head now, a cacophony of borrowed sounds. I recognized fragments of conversations Sarah and I had had, mixed with words I'd never spoken, thoughts I'd never thought. "Please," I whispered to the darkness, "just give her back." Silence fell like a curtain. Then, softly, from just outside the RV door, "Michael, it's me. It's really me this time." Sarah's voice, but different. Frightened, desperate, real. "Michael, please. Something took my place. I've been hiding, but I don't think I can hold on much longer." I pressed my face to the small window. In the moonlight, I could see two figures by the creek now. One was the thing that had been pretending to be Sarah, still standing motionless. The other was partially hidden behind a tree, gesturing frantically for me to look. "It's a trap," I said. "No, please, look at my hand." A pale hand emerged from behind the tree, and on the ring finger was Sarah's wedding ring, a simple band with 3 small diamonds we'd chosen together 4 years ago. The fake Sarah wore no ring at all. "Anyone could have that ring," I called. "Michael, remember what you whispered to me on our wedding night? After everyone had gone home and we were alone in the hotel room?" I remembered. Words so private I'd never repeated them, not even to myself. "You said you'd never believed in forever until you met me. You said I made you believe in something bigger than yourself." My heart clenched. Only the real Sarah would know those words. But the thing by the creek turned to face me, and it was speaking too, its lips moving in perfect synchronization with the voice from behind the tree. "You said you'd never believed in forever until you met me. You said I made you believe in something bigger than yourself." Both figures spoke in Sarah's voice. Both knew our most intimate moments. "Which one are you?" I called into the darkness. "I'm the one who remembers our first kiss," said the voice from behind the tree. "In the rain outside that terrible Italian restaurant. You said it was the best, worst first date ever. I'm the one who held you when your father died," said the thing by the creek. "You cried for 3 hours and kept apologizing for getting tears on my shirt." Both memories were accurate. Both voices carried the weight of real emotion. "I'm the one who loves you," they said in unison. I closed my eyes and tried to think. In 3 years of marriage, Sarah had never lied to me about anything important. She was incapable of deception, wore her emotions like jewelry for everyone to see. But these things had stolen her voice, her memories, her mannerisms. How could I tell which was real? Then I remembered something she'd said during the lightning storm when we were huddled together in the RV. "Whatever happens, don't let it separate us. Promise me, Michael." Whatever it shows you, whatever it says, remember that we're stronger together. Sarah would never hide from me, never ask me to choose between versions of herself. She would fight, even if it meant revealing herself to the enemy. The figure behind the tree was still pleading. "Michael, please, I don't have much time." But the thing by the creek had begun to change. Its two perfect features were shifting, becoming more obviously wrong. The skin was too pale, the proportions subtly off. "You're not Sarah," I said to both of them. The pleading stopped. Both figures straightened, and in the moonlight I could see they were identical. The same pale skin, the same wrong proportions, the same bright, predatory eyes. "Smart boy," they said together, and their voices weren't Sarah's anymore. They were something else, older, hungrier, infinitely patient. "Where is she?" The things smiled with Sarah's stolen face. "She's safe," they said. "She's with us now. She's becoming like us." "What are you?" "We are what remains when the forest takes back what was borrowed. Every word ever spoken here, every thought, every breath. We collect them all." The two figures began to walk toward the RV, moving in perfect synchronization. Your wife spoke so many beautiful words, cried out in such exquisite terror. We've added them all to our collection. I backed deeper into the RV, but I knew there was nowhere to go. "She's not dead, though, is she?" I asked, stalling for time. "Death is such a limited concept. She exists in all the words she ever spoke, all the voices we can make. In a way, she's more alive now than she ever was." They reached the RV and began trying the door handle, gently, almost politely. "Let us in, Michael. We have so many things to tell you, so many voices we want you to hear." The handle turned, though I knew I'd locked it. "We can sound like anyone you've ever loved, anyone you've ever lost. Wouldn't you like to hear your father's voice again?" The door swung open, and they stepped inside. In the confines of the RV, their wrongness was more obvious. They moved like people, but slightly out of sync with themselves, as if they were remembering how to inhabit flesh. "Hello, son," one of them said in my father's voice. "I've missed you so much." The other spoke in my mother's voice, though she was still alive. "Michael, sweetie, why don't you come home?" I pressed myself against the back wall, but there was nowhere left to retreat. "What do you want?" "Just to add your voice to our collection," they said, back to their not-quite-Sarah faces. "You have such interesting things to say, such lovely memories locked in that throat of yours." One of them reached for me with fingers that were too long, too pale. Its touch was freezing. And where it made contact with my skin, I felt something being drawn out. Not blood, but something more essential. "Sarah," I whispered. And from somewhere far away, impossibly distant, I heard her real voice. "Michael, fight them." The things paused, cocking their heads like predators hearing prey move in the underbrush. "Impossible," they said. "We took her hours ago." But I heard her again, faint but undeniable. "They can't take what we don't give them. Fight, Michael." I don't know where the strength came from, but I lunged forward and pushed past the two creatures out of the RV and into the darkness. Behind me, they snarled, not with Sarah's voice anymore, but with something primal and hungry. I ran into the forest, guided by Sarah's voice calling from somewhere ahead. The trees seemed to part before me, and for the first time since the storm, I found a clear path through the wilderness. "This way," Sarah called. "Hurry." The things followed, crashing through the underbrush. I could hear them calling after me in a dozen different voices. My parents, old friends, teachers from high school, everyone I'd ever cared about. "Michael, don't leave us," they pleaded in my mother's voice. "Son, come back," they begged in my father's. But Sarah's voice cut through the chorus. "Don't listen. Keep running." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber. The forest grew thicker, more tangled, but somehow I could still follow Sarah's voice through the maze of trees and fallen logs. Finally, I stumbled into a small clearing where a figure waited in the moonlight. For a moment, I thought it was another trick, another imitation. But this woman was different. Dirty, exhausted, obviously terrified, but undeniably real. Sarah, she ran to me, and when she threw her arms around my neck, I could smell her sweat, feel her heart racing against my chest. The imitations had been perfect in every detail except this. They had no scent, no warmth, no life. "How did you get away?" I asked. "I didn't," she said. "I've been running all night, but they keep finding me. They know everything I know, Michael. Every memory, every word I've ever spoken." Behind us, the forest erupted with sound. Not just voices now, but the crashing of many bodies moving through the trees. "They're coming," Sarah said. "There are more of them. So many more." Through the trees, I could see pale figures moving. Dozens of them, all wearing familiar faces. Some looked like us, others like people I'd known throughout my life. All of them converged on our small clearing with patient, inevitable hunger. "We can't run forever," I said. "No," Sarah agreed. "But we can choose how this ends." She pulled something from her pocket. A small camping knife, the one she'd brought for cutting rope and opening packages. In the moonlight, its blade gleamed like hope. If they take our voices, they become us. But if we're silent... Sarah, no. It's the only way to stop them from spreading, from using our voices to hurt other people. The pale figures ringed our clearing now, watching us with bright, hungry eyes. "Give us your words," they said in a chorus of stolen voices. "Give us your breath, your thoughts, your precious memories." Sarah looked at me with desperate love. I'd rather die as myself than live as their puppet. The knife moved toward her throat, but I caught her wrist. "Together," I said. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Together." We held the knife between us, its point aimed at both our hearts. Around the clearing, the things wearing our faces smiled with anticipation. "You can't escape us by dying," they said. "Death just makes the collection permanent." "Maybe," I said, "but at least we'll be silent." The blade pierced skin, and blood welled around the steel. The creatures howled in frustration, their stolen faces melting and reforming in rapid succession. But then, light, real sunlight, streaming through the trees, the sound of a helicopter overhead. "Hello, is anyone down there?" A voice from above, clear and human and wonderfully real. Sarah and I looked at each other in confusion. The knife clattered to the ground between us, and we realized we were no longer surrounded by pale imitations. The forest around us was normal, just trees and undergrowth and the sound of search and rescue crews calling our names. "Here!" Sarah shouted. "We're here!" The rescue happened quickly after that. We were dehydrated, exhausted, covered in scratches from our panicked flight through the forest, but alive. The search team said we'd been reported missing by the RV rental company when we failed to return the vehicle on time. "You've been gone 4 days, the lead ranger told us as we were airlifted to the nearest hospital. "Your RV was found abandoned about 2 miles from the main road. GPS showed you'd driven in circles for hours before stopping. 4 days. We remembered only 2. The doctors found nothing wrong with us except exhaustion and minor injuries. The police investigated and found no evidence of foul play, just 2 city dwellers who'd gotten lost in unfamiliar territory and panicked. But Sarah and I knew better. We never talked about what happened in detail, not even to each other. What was there to say? That we'd been trapped by things that stole voices? That we'd nearly killed ourselves to escape creatures that shouldn't exist? Who would believe that? But sometimes, late at night, I still hear voices calling from outside our apartment. My voice, Sarah's voice, the voices of people we've never met. They whisper through the walls, promising to show us beautiful things, begging us to come outside and play. Sarah hears them too. I can see it in her eyes when she suddenly stops talking mid-sentence, head cocked like she's listening to something I can't quite hear. We moved across the country after the rescue, changed our phone numbers, even changed our names. But it doesn't matter. They collected our voices in that forest. Every word we spoke, every cry of fear, every whispered declaration of love, it all belongs to them now. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wonder if we really escaped at all, or if we're still in that RV, still trapped in those endless woods, while something wearing our faces lives our lives and speaks our words. The things that took our voices are very good mimics. Good enough to fool everyone. Even us. Last week, Sarah asked me what I was writing when I sat down to record this story, but I never told her I was writing anything. And when I looked at her, really looked, I noticed her eyes were just a little too bright, her smile just a little too wide, but her voice was perfect. It's always perfect. I never believed in the stories they told about Gifford Pinchot Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Derek Spencer. I'm 29 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. It was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Aria had been working 60-hour weeks at the law firm, and I'd been pulling double shifts at the hospital. We needed to get away from Seattle, away from the noise and the pressure and the endless gray drizzle that seemed to seep into everything. The RV rental felt like freedom, a 32-foot Winnebago that would let us disappear into the wilderness for a long weekend. "Look at this place," Aria said as we wound through the towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks of Gifford Pinchot Forest. Her auburn hair caught the dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, and for a moment, I remembered why I'd fallen in love with her 3 years ago. She had this way of finding beauty in everything, even when she was exhausted. The campground we'd reserved was deep in the forest, a good hour from any main road. As we drove deeper into the woods, our phones lost signal completely. The GPS had been acting strange for the last 20 miles, occasionally showing us in the middle of lakes that clearly weren't there, or placing us miles from where we actually were. "Technology," I muttered, tapping the screen. "Give me an old-fashioned paper map any day." "When was the last time you actually used a paper map?" Aria laughed, but there was something forced about it. The deeper we got into the forest, the quieter she'd become. We found our spot just as the sun was starting to sink lower in the sky. Site 47 was isolated, surrounded by massive, old-growth trees that seemed to press in from all sides. The nearest campsite was at least a quarter-mile away, perfect for privacy, perfect for silence, perfect for things to go wrong. Setting up camp took longer than expected. The RV's leveling system kept malfunctioning, and the hookups at the site didn't match our equipment properly. By the time we had everything sorted, darkness was falling fast. Faster than it should have in late June. The forest seemed to swallow the remaining daylight greedily. "I'll get the fire going," I said, crumpling newspaper and arranging kindling, but the matches kept going out before I could get the tinder to catch. Even when I managed to light the paper, the flames died immediately, as if something was smothering them. "That's weird," Aria said, wrapping her jacket tighter around herself. "There's no wind." She was right. The air was completely still, yet something kept killing our fire before it could establish itself. After 20 minutes of trying, I finally got a small flame going using lighter fluid, but it burned with an odd blue tint that made both of us uneasy. "Must be something in the wood," I said, but I didn't believe it. We ate dinner inside the RV as a full darkness settled over the campground. Through the windows, the forest was a wall of black punctuated by our struggling campfire. I'd camped plenty of times before, but I'd never experienced darkness this complete. It felt alive somehow, pressing against the windows like something trying to get in. "I think I'll take a walk before bed," I announced after we'd cleaned up. "Work off some of that trail mix." "In the dark?" Aria looked up from her book, eyebrows raised. "Derek, you can't see 3 feet out there." "I've got my flashlight. I'll just walk the loop road for a bit. Clear my head." She nodded reluctantly. "Don't go far, and take your phone, even if there's no signal." I kissed her forehead and grabbed my LED flashlight. The moment I stepped outside the RV, the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. My flashlight beam felt pathetically weak against the pressing blackness. Trees that had looked manageable during the day now loomed like monuments, their branches reaching down like gnarled fingers. The silence was complete. No insects, no rustling leaves, no distant traffic. Just my footsteps on the gravel road and the sound of my own breathing, which seemed unnaturally loud. I'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when my flashlight beam caught something pale on the ground. A piece of paper, half hidden under some fallen leaves. Curious, I picked it up and brushed it clean. It was a page torn from a journal, the edges yellowed with age. The handwriting was faded but legible in my flashlight beam. June 24th, Day 1. We arrived at Gifford Pinchot this afternoon, Site 47, just like we planned. Derek had trouble with the fire. It wouldn't catch properly, kept burning blue when it finally lit. Strange. Arya made jokes about it, but I could tell she was nervous too. The darkness here is different. Thicker, somehow. Derek found this journal tonight during his walk. He'll think it's just coincidence at first, someone else's camping trip, but then he'll notice the names. My blood went cold. I reread the page twice, my hands shaking so badly the beam danced across the paper. This had to be some kind of joke. Someone had seen us arrive, learned our names somehow, written this as a prank. But who? We hadn't seen another soul since entering the forest. I looked around frantically, expecting to see someone watching from the trees, but there was only darkness. I folded the page and stuffed it in my pocket, then hurried back toward the RV, my imagination running wild. Every shadow looked like a person, every distant tree trunk a figure waiting to step into the light. Arya was already in bed when I got back, reading her Kindle under the covers. "How was your walk?" she asked without looking up. "Fine," I lied. "Nothing exciting." But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that journal page, the way it had described our exact situation. After Arya's breathing deepened into sleep, I pulled out my phone and used its screen to read the page again. Derek found this journal tonight during his walk. He'll think it's just coincidence at first, someone else's camping trip, but then he'll notice the names. June 25th, Day 2. Derek didn't tell Arya about the journal page. He's trying to convince himself it's a prank, but he's scared. He'll go looking for the rest of the journal in the morning while she's sleeping. He'll find it hidden in the hollow of a dead cedar about 50 yards northwest of our campsite, wrapped in oilcloth. The journal will tell him things. Things about what's going to happen to us. Things about what's already happened to the others who found this place. He should throw it away, burn it, leave immediately. He won't. My mouth went dry. I looked over at Arya, sleeping peacefully beside me, her face relaxed and trusting. The urge to wake her up, to tell her we needed to leave immediately, was overwhelming. But what would I say? That I'd found a journal page that seemed to predict our actions? She'd think I was having some kind of breakdown. And the rational part of my mind agreed with her. This had to be an elaborate prank. Someone with too much time on their hands and a sick sense of humor. But as I lay there in the darkness, listening to the absolute silence outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Something that had been waiting for us to arrive. I must have dozed fitfully because I woke to the sound of Arya moving around the RV kitchen. Gray dawn light filtered through the windows, making the forest look normal again. Almost normal. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, pouring coffee from the camp percolator. "Sleep okay?" "Like a baby," I lied, accepting a steaming mug. The coffee was perfect, strong and hot and reassuringly normal. After breakfast, Arya settled into a camp chair with her book while I announced I was going to explore a bit. "Don't get lost," she said absently, already absorbed in her novel. I walked northwest from our campsite, counting steps. At 47 steps, I found the dead cedar. It was massive, probably centuries old, with a hollow in its base large enough to crawl into. My heart hammered as I approached it. Inside the hollow, wrapped in rotting oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. I sat down heavily beside the tree, my hands shaking as I unwrapped it. The leather was water-stained and cracked, the pages yellow with age. The same handwriting from the loose page covered every sheet, documenting what appeared to be a camping trip that mirrored our own in disturbing detail. June 24th, Day. We arrived at Gifford Pinchot this afternoon, Site 47, just like we planned. The entry continued exactly as I'd read the night before, but there were more pages. Many more. June 25th, Day 2. Derek found the journal this morning, just as it said he would. He's reading this right now sitting beside the dead cedar tree, wondering if he's losing his mind. He's not. This is all real. This place It's not like other places. Time works differently here. Consequences precede actions. Effects come before causes. Itu, the journal, belongs to Marcus Webb, who came here with his wife Rachel in 1987. They found a journal too, one written by Thomas and Helen Carver in 1962. Thomas found a journal written by someone who came before them. The pattern goes back decades, maybe longer. Each couple thinks they're the first to find it. Each couple believes they can change what's written. They can't. The events always unfold exactly as described, because this isn't predicting the future. It's documenting something that has already happened, over and over again. Derek will show Arya the journal tonight. She'll be skeptical at first, but then she'll read the entry about her appendicitis scar, something Derek has never told anyone about, something no one else could know. That's when she'll believe. They'll try to leave in the morning. The RV won't start. I stopped reading, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold the journal. This was impossible. Some kind of elaborate psychological experiment, maybe. Hidden cameras documenting our reactions. But I thought about Arya's scar, a thin white line on her lower right abdomen from an appendectomy when she was 12. She was self-conscious about it, always wore one-piece bathing suits. I'd never mentioned it to anyone, never posted about it online. How could someone else know? I flipped through more pages, looking for the entry the journal mentioned. Arya has a small scar on her lower right abdomen from an appendectomy when she was 12. She got it during summer camp in Oregon. She fell off a rope swing into the lake and the pain hit her while she was underwater. She thought she was drowning, but it was her appendix rupturing. Derek thinks she's beautiful despite her self-consciousness about it. He's never told anyone about the scar because she asked him not to. My vision blurred. I felt like I was going to vomit. No one could know this. No one except Arya and me. I forced myself to keep reading. June 25th, evening. They've been arguing since Derek showed her the journal. Arya wants to leave immediately, but the RV battery is dead. Derek will try to jump it from the truck that arrives around 8 p.m., the ranger making his evening rounds. But the truck won't have jumper cables. The ranger's name is Tom Hutchins. He's worked these woods for 15 years. He'll tell them about the other couples, the ones who've gone missing over the years, always at Site 47, always the same pattern. He'll offer to drive them to town in the morning. They'll accept gratefully. He won't come back. Around 11 p.m., Arya will hear voices calling her name from the forest. She'll think it's Derek playing a prank at first, even though he'll be sitting right beside her in the RV. She'll go outside to investigate. She'll be gone for 3 hours. When she comes back, she won't be the same. I slammed the journal shut and stumbled back toward our campsite. This was insane. I was losing my mind. Stress from work, maybe, or some kind of breakdown triggered by being in the woods. But when I got back to the RV, Arya took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Derek, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed her the journal. She listened patiently as I explained where I'd found it, how it seemed to predict our actions. She flipped through the pages with growing skepticism until she reached the entry about her scar. Her face went white. The journal slipped from her hands and fell to the ground. "How?" she whispered. "Derek, how could someone know this?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think we should leave, right now." She nodded rapidly. Yes, let's pack up and go." But when I turned the key in the RV's ignition, nothing happened. The engine didn't even try to turn over. The dashboard lights were dead. "Batteries completely drained," I said, popping the hood to check the connections. Everything looked fine, but there was no power at all. We spent the rest of the afternoon trying to troubleshoot the problem, but it was hopeless. The RV was dead, and we were stuck until we could get help. At exactly 8:03 p.m., we saw headlights approaching through the trees. A Forest Service pickup truck pulled into our campsite, and a middle-aged man in uniform climbed out. "Evening, folks," he called. "I'm Tom Hutchins, one of the rangers for this area. Just making my rounds. Everything okay?" Arya and I exchanged a look. The journal had been right about his name, right about the timing. Actually, no, I said. Our RV won't start. Dead battery, I think. You wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you? Tom shook his head apologetically. Sorry, friend. Meant to grab some from the station this morning, but forgot. I can give you folks a ride to town first thing tomorrow morning, though. There's a mechanic there who can come out with a jump pack. Just like the journal had predicted. That would be great, Arya said, but her voice was tight with fear. We really appreciate it. Tom chatted with us for a few more minutes, then mentioned almost casually, You folks aren't the first to have trouble at this site, you know. Had several couples over the years who ran into difficulties out here. Most of them ended up leaving in the middle of the night, abandoning their gear, their vehicles. Strangest thing. What kind of difficulties? I asked, though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Well, people reported strange sounds. Voices calling from the woods. Electronics going haywire. Some claimed they found journals or notes describing their trips in detail. Of course, most folks who tell those stories had been drinking pretty heavily by the time I talked to them. He laughed, but it sounded forced. After he left, Arya and I sat in the RV with all the lights on, reading more of the journal. The entries became increasingly disturbing as they went on. June the 26th, day 3. Arya came back at 2:17 a.m. Derek will think she looks normal at first, but something is wrong with her eyes. They don't track movement properly anymore. She blinks too infrequently. When she smiles, it doesn't reach her eyes. She'll claim she just went for a walk, got turned around in the dark. But she'll have marks on her arms, thin scratches like fingernails, and she'll smell different. Not bad exactly, but earthy, like she's been underground. Derek will pretend everything is fine. He'll try to convince himself the changes are just stress, just his imagination. But Arya will start doing things she's never done before. She'll sit perfectly still for hours, just staring out the windows. She'll answer questions before he asks them. And she'll know things about the forest, about this place, about what happened to the others. By morning, Derek will realize that whatever came back from the woods isn't entirely his girlfriend anymore. This is ridiculous, Arya said, but her voice shook. Someone is playing an elaborate prank on us. They're watching us somehow, taking notes about our behavior. But even as she said it, she kept glancing toward the windows, toward the darkness pressing against the glass. We tried to stay awake, tried to stick together, but around 10:30 p.m. exhaustion started to set in. Arya was nodding off in her chair, and I suggested we try to get some sleep. We'll lock the door, I said. Keep all the lights on. Tom will be back in the morning, and we can get out of here. Arya nodded, but as we were getting ready for bed, we heard it. A voice calling from the forest. Arya, Arya, come here. It was distant but clear. A woman's voice with an odd echo to it, as if it was coming from the bottom of a well. Did you hear that? Arya asked, freezing with her toothbrush halfway to her mouth. Yeah, I said. Probably just other campers. Sound carries weird in the forest. But the voice came again, closer this time. Arya, we need you. Come to us. Arya moved toward the door, drawn by the sound. Where are you going? I grabbed her arm. That sounds like my sister, she said dreamily. Jenny's voice, but that's impossible. She's in Portland. Arya, your sister isn't here. Don't go outside. But she pulled away from me, her eyes unfocused. I need to check. What if she's in trouble? What if she drove up here and got lost? She reached for the door handle. Arya, no. I grabbed her again, harder this time. That's not Jenny. Look at me. When was the last time your sister went camping? When was the last time she even left the city? For a moment, Arya's eyes cleared. You're right, she said. Jenny hates camping. She won't even stay at hotels without room service. But the voice came again, and this time it was my voice calling from the darkness. Arya, I need help. I'm hurt. Please come help me. We both stared at each other in horror. I was standing right in front of her, my mouth closed, but my voice was clearly calling from the woods. What the hell? I whispered. Derek, I need you. The voice called again, sounding panicked. I fell in a hole. I think my leg is broken. Arya started toward the door again. "We have to help you," she said, and I realized she was talking to the voice, not to me. "That's not me out there," I said, blocking the door. "I'm right here." But she pushed past me with surprising strength and pulled the door open before I could stop her. The night air rushed in, carrying the smell of pine and something else, something rotten and organic, like mushrooms growing in dark places. "I'll be right back," she said, stepping into the darkness. "Derek needs help." "I'm Derek," I shouted after her. But she was already gone, swallowed by the absolute darkness beyond our lights. I grabbed my flashlight and started after her, but the moment I stepped outside, the voices stopped. The silence was complete again, so profound it seemed to ring in my ears. "Arya," I called. "Arya, come back." My flashlight beam penetrated maybe 10 feet into the darkness before being absorbed completely. I could see the vague shapes of trees, but everything beyond that was black void. I searched for her for over an hour, calling her name, following what I thought might be footprints in the soft forest floor. But the beam of my flashlight seemed to grow weaker as I went deeper into the woods, and eventually I had to admit I was lost myself. When I finally made it back to the RV, I was shaking with cold and fear. The clock on the dashboard read 2:17 a.m., exactly when the journal said she would return. I was sitting at the dinette, staring out the window with the journal open in front of me, when I saw her pale shape emerging from the darkness. She walked slowly, deliberately, her arms at her sides. Even from a distance, something looked wrong with the way she moved. I rushed to open the door for her. "Jesus, Arya, where have you been? I looked everywhere for you." "I went for a walk," she said simply, stepping past me into the RV. I got turned around in the dark. Her voice sounded normal, but there was something flat about it, like she was reciting lines. And when I looked at her arms, I could see thin scratches along her forearms, as if she'd been clawed by something. "Are you hurt?" I asked, reaching for her arm. She pulled away. "I'm fine, just tired." But as she moved past me, I caught a whiff of that earthy smell again. Stronger now, like soil and decay and growing things in dark places. She went straight to bed without washing her face or brushing her teeth, things she never skipped. I lay down beside her, but she didn't curl up against me like she usually did. She just lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, blinking very slowly. I pretended to sleep, but I watched her through half-closed eyes. For hours, she didn't move at all. She barely seemed to breathe. And when she did blink, it was wrong somehow. Too deliberate, like she was consciously remembering to do it. Around dawn, I must have actually fallen asleep, because I woke to the sound of her making coffee. She was standing at the stove, perfectly still except for her hands working the percolator. She hadn't changed clothes. She hadn't showered. She was still wearing the same jeans and sweater from yesterday, now stained with dirt and something that looked like moss. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Good morning, Derek," she replied without turning around. Her voice was perfectly pleasant and completely empty. I grabbed the journal and flipped to the entry for day 3. Derek will try to act normal, but every interaction with Arya will feel wrong. She'll answer his questions, but always a half-second too early, as if she knows what he's going to ask before he asks it. She'll remember things perfectly. Their first date, her childhood phone number, the name of his college roommate. But she'll recite these memories like someone reading from a script. Most disturbing will be her sudden knowledge of things she shouldn't know. She'll mention the missing couples by name, describe their final moments in detail. She'll know about the journal entries that come after today's date, entries Derek hasn't read yet. She'll try to convince him to stay. I looked up at Arya, who was now sitting across from me with her coffee, watching me read with an expression of mild interest. "What does it say about today?" she asked. The question hit me like a physical blow. She'd asked it before I'd finished reading the entry, and her tone was almost playful. "How did you know what I was reading?" I asked. "You've been carrying that journal around since yesterday," she said. "It's obviously important to you." That was reasonable. That was normal. But something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. "Arya," I said carefully, "do you remember going outside last night?" "Of course, I went for a walk and got lost." "Do you remember hearing voices?" Someone calling your name? She tilted her head slightly like a bird considering a question. There are always voices in the forest, Derek. You just have to know how to listen. My blood went cold. What do you mean? The others, she said simply. The ones who came before us. They're still here, you know. Marcus and Rachel Webb, Thomas and Helen Carver, all of them. They've been waiting so long for company. I stood up so quickly my chair fell over. How do you know those names? She smiled, and it was Arya's smile, but wrong somehow. Too wide, too knowing. I know lots of things now. I know Tom Hutchins isn't coming back. I know our RV will never start again. I know you're going to try to hike out of here around noon, but you'll just end up walking in circles until you come back to the campsite. How could you possibly know that? Because it's all in the journal, Derek. All of it, including what happens tonight. With shaking hands, I flipped through the remaining pages. There were entries for days we hadn't lived yet, written in the same familiar handwriting. June 27th. Day 4. Derek tried to leave on foot, but returned after 6 hours of walking. The forest paths don't lead out anymore. They all loop back to Site 47. This is how the place works. Once you find the journal, once you read your story, you become part of it. The boundaries shift. Reality bends. You're no longer in the forest that exists on maps and GPS systems. You're in the forest that exists in these pages. Arya is fully changed now. She speaks with the voices of all the others who've been taken. She knows their stories, their final moments. She'll try to convince Derek to join them willingly. She'll tell him it's peaceful, that the fear stops once you accept what's happening. She'll be telling the truth. June 28th, Day 5. Derek will hold out one more day. He'll barricade himself in the RV, try to ignore Arya as she stands outside calling to him. But hunger and thirst will drive him out eventually. And when he opens the door, he'll see that she's not alone anymore. The others will be with her. Marcus and Rachel, Thomas and Helen, all the couples who found this place before them. They'll be pale and still, their eyes reflecting light like animals' eyes, but they'll be smiling. All of them will be smiling. They'll reach for him with cold fingers, and he'll realize that fighting is pointless. The journal has already been written. The story has already been told. All that's left is to live it. I slammed the journal shut, but it was too late. I'd seen enough. You read it, Arya said, still smiling that wrong smile. You know how it ends. This isn't real, I said. None of this is real. Does it matter? She asked. Real, unreal. Those are just words. We're here. The story is happening. You can fight it, or you can accept it, but you can't change it. I backed toward the RV's bedroom, pulling out my phone. No signal, of course, but I tried calling 911 anyway. The call failed immediately. Derek, Arya said, following me. There's no point in running. There's nowhere to go. Stay away from me, I warned, grabbing a kitchen knife from the drawer. She stopped, looking genuinely hurt. I'm not going to harm you. I would never harm you. I love you. And the terrible thing was, I could still hear traces of my Arya in her voice. Whatever had happened to her in the woods, some part of her was still in there. Then, come with me, I said. We'll leave the journal here. We'll hike out together. Get back to Seattle. Back to our real lives. She shook her head sadly. This is our real life now. This is where we belong. I spent the rest of the day barricaded in the bedroom while she sat outside the door, talking to me in Arya's voice about things no living person should know. She told me about Marcus Webb's final moments, how he'd tried to swim across the lake to escape but had been pulled under by pale hands. She described Helen Carver's last words, her final desperate prayer before the forest claimed her. She spoke with intimate knowledge of their fear, their pain, their surrender. As night fell, I heard other voices joining hers, whispered conversations in languages I didn't recognize, soft laughter that sounded like wind through dead leaves. Through the bedroom window, I could see shapes moving between the trees, pale figures that might once have been human. The journal had been right. Tom Hutchins never came back. Around midnight, driven by thirst and the desperate hope that I might be able to reason with her, I opened the bedroom door. Arya was sitting at the dinette, exactly where I'd left her. But she wasn't alone. They stood behind her in a silent crowd, dozens of pale figures with reflecting eyes and 2 wide smiles. Men and women in clothing from different eras, all of them staring at me with the same expression of patient waiting. "Hello, Derek," Arya said, and her voice was now a chorus of voices, all the victims speaking in unison. "We've been waiting for you." One of the figures stepped forward, a middle-aged man in hiking clothes from the 1980s. His name tag read, Marcus Webb. "It's not so bad," he said, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "The fear stops once you join us. The uncertainty ends. You become part of something larger, something permanent." "The journal," whispered a woman who must have been Helen Carver. "It's never wrong. It's already written your ending." I looked down at the leather book in Arya's hands. She opened it to the final page. June 28th, 11:47 p.m. Derek will see this entry and realize he has no choice left. The journal doesn't predict the future. It creates it. Every word written becomes reality. Every story must be completed. He'll understand that the only way to end his suffering is to write the final entry himself, to take up the pen and document his surrender. And once he does, once his story is finished, the journal will be ready for the next couple. The next victims who think they're just going camping in Gifford Pinchot forest. The cycle will continue. Derek Spencer, age 29, will take the pen now. He'll write these words: "I understand, I accept, I join them willingly." And then the story will be complete. My hands shook as I took the pen from Arya's cold fingers. The pale crowd watched silently, their reflecting eyes never blinking. Arya smiled at me with love and horrible anticipation. I looked down at the blank space at the bottom of the page, pen hovering over the yellowed paper, and I wrote, "I understand. I accept. I join them willingly." The moment I finished the final letter, a profound calm washed over me. The fear dissolved like smoke. The uncertainty vanished. I understood now why they were all smiling. It was peaceful here, timeless. The journal would wait in the hollow cedar for the next couple to find, and we would wait with it. Patient guardians of a story that never ended, only repeated. They say time heals all wounds, but they're wrong. Time doesn't exist here in the forest that isn't on any map. There is only the eternal present, the endless cycle of the story being told again and again. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is still, I think I can hear them coming. The next couple, driving their RV deeper into the woods, looking for a romantic getaway, looking for Site 47. And we'll be waiting for them, Arya and I and all the others. We'll be ready to help them find the journal, to watch them read their story, to welcome them home when their time comes. It's not so bad, really. The fear stops once you accept it. The uncertainty ends, and the smile. Once you put it on, you never want to take it off again. Found among the possessions of Derek Spencer and Arya Charlotte, who disappeared during a camping trip to Gifford Pinchot Forest in June 2025. Their RV was discovered at Site 47 with no signs of struggle. This document was recovered from Spencer's laptop. Despite extensive searches, no trace of the couple has ever been found. Site 47 remains closed to the public pending further investigation. Detective Sarah Morrison, King County Sheriff's Department. We should have never gone to Palo Duro Canyon. I'm David Jones. I was 34 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything. Sarah had been planning this trip for months. "We need this, David," she'd said, spreading brochures across our kitchen table like prayer cards. Just us, the road, and no deadlines. The photos showed endless Texas sky, red rock formations carved by millions of years of wind and water, and RV sites nestled in what looked like another world entirely. After 18 months of her working double shifts at the hospital and me grinding through software development contracts, we both needed to disappear for a while. The Winnebago rental had cost more than our mortgage payment, but Sarah's eyes lit up when she saw it in the lot. 28 feet of supposed freedom, complete with a kitchenette, shower, and a bed that converted from the dinette. "It's perfect," she'd whispered, running her hands along the countertops like she was blessing a new home. We'd driven out of Houston on a Friday morning in early October when the Texas heat finally started to break. Sarah rode shotgun with her feet up on the dashboard, reading aloud from a guidebook about the canyon's history. Something about it being the second largest canyon in the United States, carved by the Prairie Dogtown Fork of the Red River. She had a way of making even geological formations sound romantic. "Listen to this," she said, pushing her dark hair behind her ear. "The Comanche called it Place of the Whirlwind. Isn't that beautiful?" I'd smiled and squeezed her hand. The highway stretched ahead of us, empty and promising. At that moment, I couldn't imagine anything going wrong. The first sign should have been the GPS. We'd been using the same Garmin for 5 years, and it had never given us problems. But about 50 miles outside of Amarillo, it started acting strange. The screen would flicker between our current route and what looked like old, hand-drawn maps. Lines appeared and disappeared, showing roads that definitely weren't there when I looked out the windshield. "Must be an update issue," I muttered, tapping the screen. "We'll navigate the old-fashioned way." Sarah laughed. "You mean asking for directions? Do you even remember how?" But when we stopped for gas in Canyon, the attendant gave us odd looks when we asked about the state park. He was maybe 60, weathered face under a John Deere cap, and he studied us for a long moment before answering. "Y'all going to the canyon for the weekend?" "That's the plan," Sarah said brightly. He nodded slowly, then glanced at the sky. "Well, you be careful down there. Weather's been unpredictable lately." The sky was cloudless, crystal blue from horizon to horizon. "Storm coming in?" I asked. "Something like that." He turned away and started cleaning our windshield with more attention than it needed. "Just stay close to the main campgrounds. Don't go wandering off after dark." Sarah and I exchanged looks. "Is there something we should know about?" she pressed. The old man paused in his cleaning. "Probably nothing. Just, there's been some strange reports lately. People getting lost, even on trails they've hiked before. Folks hearing things that ain't there." He straightened up, avoiding our eyes. "Like I said, probably nothing. Y'all have a good time." We drove away with full tanks and uneasy feelings. But the autumn afternoon was too beautiful to stay worried. The landscape shifted as we approached the park, flat plains giving way to suddenly dramatic breaks in the earth. Sarah gasped when the canyon first came into view. A vast gash in the world filled with layers of red, orange, and yellow stone that seemed to glow in the slanted light. "My God, David, it's like Mars." She wasn't wrong. The Palo Duro stretched out before us, 16 miles long and up to 6 miles wide in places, the far rim lost in afternoon haze. Ancient stone formations rose from the canyon floor like sleeping giants. The famous Lighthouse Rock, the Sad Monkey, countless unnamed spires and mesas that looked almost deliberate in their placement. We found our campsite in the Mesquite Grove area, a loop of RV pads nestled between twisted mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. Only a few other campers were visible. A pop-up trailer about 100 yards away and what looked like a fifth wheel on the far side of the loop. The isolation should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like we were being watched. "I love it," Sarah said as we leveled the RV and connected utilities. "It's so quiet." That was the problem. It was too quiet. I've spent enough time in wild places to know that nature is never truly silent. There should have been bird calls, insects humming, the whisper of wind through desert grass. But as the afternoon wore on and we set up our outdoor chairs and camp table, I became increasingly aware that we were surrounded by an almost oppressive quiet. No cicadas, no ravens. Even the wind seemed muted, barely stirring the mesquite branches overhead. "Maybe the animals are just resting," Sarah suggested when I mentioned it. "It's still pretty warm." She was probably right. The temperature was still in the high 80s, unseasonably warm for October. But as evening approached and the heat began to fade, the silence persisted. We grilled hamburgers on a portable propane grill as the sun set, painting the canyon walls in deeper shades of red and gold. Sarah had brought a bottle of wine, and we sat in our camp chairs watching the light show, trying to identify the rock formations we'd seen in the brochures. "There's Lighthouse Rock," she said, pointing to a distinctive pillar about 2 miles away. "And that must be the Spanish Skirts Formation." The wine helped me relax. Maybe I'd been overthinking things. This was exactly what we needed: space, silence, and each other. When Sarah suggested we take a short walk to explore the immediate area before it got fully dark, I readily agreed. The trail nearest our campsite was marked as an easy half-mile loop through typical canyon flora. We walked hand in hand, Sarah's small maglite cutting a narrow beam through the gathering dusk. The path was well-maintained and clearly marked, winding between clusters of prickly pear and yucca. That's when we heard the first voice, "Help me." Faint, distant, coming from deeper in the canyon. "Please, somebody help me." We stopped walking. Sarah gripped my arm. "Did you hear that?" I had. A woman's voice, thin with desperation, echoing off the canyon walls. It seemed to be coming from somewhere to our south, down toward the canyon floor. "We should find a ranger," Sarah said immediately. "Someone's in trouble." I was already pulling out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Not even a single bar. "The campground host," I said. "There's got to be someone." "Help me, please." The voice came again, more urgent now, and closer. But here's the thing that made my blood turn cold. I recognized that voice. It sounded exactly like Sarah. I looked at my wife, standing right beside me with her mouth slightly open in concern. The voice called again from the darkness, and this time I was sure. It was Sarah's voice calling for help. Perfect mimicry, down to the slight rasp she got when she was scared. Sarah heard it too. I could tell by the way her face went pale in the flashlight beam. That sounds like..." "We're going back to the RV," I said firmly, "right now." But when we turned around, the trail was gone. I don't mean it was hard to see in the dark. I mean the clear, well-maintained path we'd been following for 10 minutes had simply vanished. Sarah's flashlight beam played across undisturbed desert floor, scattered with rocks and desert grass and prickly pear cactus, but no trail markers, no cleared path, nothing to indicate humans had ever walked this way. "This isn't right," Sarah whispered. "We just came from that direction. The trail was right here." I used my phone's flashlight to expand our search, but it only confirmed what the maglite showed. In every direction there was nothing but raw desert stretching into darkness. "Help me!" The voice came again, Sarah's voice from multiple directions now. South toward the canyon floor, but also east, west, even from behind us where our campsite should have been. Sarah was shaking. "David, what's happening?" I tried to stay calm, to think rationally. We couldn't have gotten that lost that quickly. The RV was maybe a quarter-mile away at most. If we just picked a direction and walked steadily, we'd have to hit the campground or a road or something. "We go that way," I said, pointing north toward where I thought the campground should be. "Stay close. Keep the flashlight moving, and if we don't find the camp in 15 minutes, we'll stop and wait for dawn." It sounded reasonable. It sounded like the kind of practical solution that would work in any normal situation. But we weren't in a normal situation anymore. We walked for what felt like hours, though my watch insisted it was only 30 minutes. The landscape never changed. The same scattered rocks, the same twisted mesquite trees, the same empty horizon in every direction. And the voices never stopped. Sometimes it was Sarah's voice calling for help. Sometimes it was my own voice, which was somehow even more disturbing. Occasionally, it was both of us, carrying on conversations we'd never had, saying things we'd never say. "Do you think we're really lost?" my voice would ask from the darkness ahead. "I don't know," Sarah's voice would answer from behind us. "I'm scared, David. We should have listened to that man at the gas station." My voice again coming from directly overhead, as if I were floating in the air above us. The real Sarah clung to my arm so tightly it hurt. "Make it stop," she whispered. "Please make it stop." But I couldn't make it stop, because I didn't understand what was happening. This wasn't possible. People didn't just lose trails that were clearly marked. GPS units didn't malfunction this completely, and voices didn't echo from nowhere. perfectly mimicking people who were standing right beside you. When my watch showed 11:30 p.m., we finally saw a light. "Thank God," Sarah breathed. "That's got to be someone's campsite." The light was maybe 100 yards away, a warm yellow glow that looked like a lantern or campfire. We hurried toward it, stumbling over rocks and through low desert scrub, desperate for any sign of other people. But as we got closer, the light looked wrong. Too steady for a fire, too bright for a lantern, and there was something else, a smell in the air like burnt metal and ozone, the kind of smell you get right before a lightning strike. "David," Sarah said, stopping abruptly. "I don't think we should—" The light went out. Instantly. Completely, as if someone had thrown a switch. We stood in absolute darkness, the desert silence pressing against our eardrums. Then Sarah screamed. Not the Sarah beside me. She was squeezing my arm so hard I thought she might break bone. This scream came from where the light had been, a perfect replica of Sarah's voice raised in absolute terror and agony. "David!" the voice shrieked. "Oh God, David, help me! It's got me! It's—" The scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing. "We run," I whispered. "Right now, we run." But we ran in the wrong direction. Instead of away from where the light had been, we ran toward it, as if something was pulling us forward against our will. Sarah tried to stop, digging her heels into the sandy ground, but she couldn't. I tried to change course, but my legs kept carrying me straight ahead. We stumbled into a clearing we definitely hadn't seen before. Maybe 50 feet across, perfectly circular. The ground was different here, packed hard and smooth as if it had been swept clean. And in the center of the clearing was a ring of stones arranged around what had once been a fire pit. The stones were wrong. They were too white, too smooth, and they seemed to glow faintly in the darkness with their own internal light. As we got closer, I realized they weren't stones at all. They were bones. Human femurs and tibias, arranged in a perfect circle around a pit filled with something black and thick that definitely wasn't ash. "David," Sarah whispered. "David, I want to go home." But we couldn't leave the clearing. Every time we tried to walk toward the edge, our feet carried us back toward the center, toward the ring of bones and the black pit. That's when we heard the new voice. Not Sarah's voice, not mine. Something else, something that sounded like it was speaking through a mouthful of gravel and broken glass. "Welcome," it said, seeming to come from the pit itself. "We've been waiting for you." Sarah fainted, just collapsed beside me like her strings had been cut. I caught her before she hit the ground, and as I knelt there holding her unconscious body, more lights began appearing around the clearing. Not the warm, yellow glow we'd seen before. These were cold, blue-white lights that hurt to look at directly. They floated about 6 feet off the ground, bobbing gently like they were suspended in water. And they were moving closer. "Put her down," the gravel voice said, louder now. "She's not the one we want." "Like hell," I managed to croak. Something that might have been laughter echoed from the pit. "You have no choice, David Jones. You've been hearing the calls, haven't you? Your own voice, calling for help? That's because part of you is already here. Part of you has always been here." The lights were close enough now that I could see they weren't lights at all. They were faces. Human faces, pale and luminous with empty eye sockets and mouths frozen in silent screams. Men, women, even children, all floating in the darkness around us. "Every year," the voice continued, "someone hears the call. Someone follows their own voice into the desert. And every year, they join us." One of the floating faces drifted closer, and I recognized him. The old man from the gas station, his weathered features now glowing with that cold light, his mouth moving soundlessly. "He tried to warn you," the gravel voice said. "They all try to warn the next ones. But the canyon calls, doesn't it, David? It calls with your own voice, and you can't resist." Sarah stirred in my arms, her eyes fluttering open. When she saw the floating faces surrounding us, she tried to scream, but no sound came out. "Don't look at them," I whispered. "Close your eyes. Don't look." But I couldn't stop looking. More faces were appearing, dozens of them, all with that same luminous pallor and those empty, screaming mouths. Some looked recent, with features I could still clearly make out. Others seemed ancient, little more than skulls with translucent skin stretched across the bone. "Your turn, David," the voice said. "Step into the circle." My legs moved without my permission, carrying me and Sarah toward the ring of bones. I fought it every step of the way, but whatever force controlled this place was too strong. "No," I growled through gritted teeth. "I won't let you have her." "We don't want her," the voice replied, amused. "We want you. She'll wander the desert until dawn, then find her way back to your RV. She'll drive home and tell everyone you vanished in the night, that you must have gone for a walk and gotten lost. And what happens to me? You join us. You become one of the voices that calls to the next travelers who ignore the warnings. You'll spend eternity trying to warn them away, knowing they'll never listen." We were at the edge of the bone circle now. The black substance in the pit was moving, rippling like liquid tar. The smell of ozone was so strong it made my eyes water. "David," Sarah whispered, "I can move again." She was right. The force that had been controlling us seemed to be focused entirely on me now. Sarah could turn her head, could shift in my arms. "When I say run," I whispered back, "you run toward the brightest star you can see, and don't look back. I won't leave you. You will. Because if you don't, this thing gets both of us." The gravel voice laughed again. "How touching. But she won't make it, David. The desert is vast, and she has no water, no food, no shelter. She'll die of exposure long before she reaches the highway. Maybe, but at least she'd have a chance." "Run," I said, and pushed Sarah away from me as hard as I could. She stumbled, caught her balance, and took off sprinting into the darkness. The floating faces turned to follow her movement, but they didn't pursue. They stayed focused on me. "Pointless," the voice said, "but admirable. Step into the circle, David." My right foot crossed the line of bones before I could stop it. The moment I did, agony shot through my entire body like being struck by lightning and set on fire at the same time. I screamed, and my voice echoed back from all directions. Not the normal echo you'd expect in a canyon, but my exact voice, screaming the same scream at exactly the same moment. "Yes," the gravel voice hissed. "Now you understand. Now you know what you've become." My left foot crossed the line. The pain doubled, and I realized I could see myself from multiple angles, through my own eyes, but also from the perspective of each floating face around the clearing. I was fragmenting, becoming one of them even while still alive. But I could also see Sarah, still running through the desert, guided by starlight and pure determination. She was moving in the right direction, toward the distant glow of Amarillo. She might actually make it. That gave me strength for one last act of defiance. Instead of stepping into the pit, I threw myself sideways, breaking the bone circle and scattering the ancient femurs across the clearing. The gravel voice shrieked in rage. The floating faces rushed toward me, their mouths opening impossibly wide, and the ground beneath the clearing began to crack and crumble. "You cannot escape," the voice howled. "You are ours. You have always been ours." Maybe that was true, but Sarah wasn't. The clearing collapsed inward, and I fell into darkness deeper than the bottom of the canyon. I woke up 3 days later in Amarillo General Hospital. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside my bed, her hand wrapped around mine. When she saw me awake, she started crying. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered. "They found you at the bottom of an old mine shaft, about 5 miles from the campground. You'd been there for almost 72 hours. The official story was that I'd gone for a late-night walk, gotten disoriented in the dark, and fallen into an unmarked shaft. Heat, exhaustion, and dehydration had caused hallucinations and memory loss. Sarah had searched for me all night before driving to the park headquarters at dawn. A reasonable explanation, the kind that looked good in police reports and insurance claims. But I remember every moment of that night in the clearing. I remember the bone circle, the floating faces, the voice from the pit. And sometimes, especially when I'm alone at night, I still hear it calling. Not my own voice anymore, though. Now it's Sarah's voice I hear, calling for help from impossible distances. Because here's the thing the doctors don't know. The thing I can't tell Sarah. The thing that keeps me awake every night. I didn't fall into a mine shaft. I fell into that pit in the clearing, and something came back up wearing my face. Sarah thinks she saved me. Thinks she guided rescue workers to where I'd fallen. But the David Jones who climbed out of that hole isn't the same David Jones who went down. I know this because I can see the floating faces now, all the time, hovering at the edges of my vision. The old man from the gas station nods at me sometimes, and I understand what he's trying to say. I'm one of them now. One of the voices that calls to travelers in the night. And someday soon, Sarah will hear my real voice calling from the canyon, begging for help. When that happens, she'll come looking for me, and this thing wearing my face will be waiting. Sarah doesn't know yet that we're going back to Palo Duro Canyon next month. She thinks it was her idea, but I've been planting the suggestion for weeks now, talking about how we never got to properly explore the place, how we should give it another try now that I'm fully recovered. She's so excited about the trip. She's already made reservations at the same campground, the same RV site. She has no idea that she'll be hearing her husband's voice calling from the darkness, pleading for rescue from a place deeper than any canyon. And she has no idea that the thing sleeping beside her every night isn't really her husband at all. The old man at the gas station was right about one thing. We should have stayed close to the main campgrounds. We should have listened to the warnings. But it's too late for that now. The canyon calls with the voices of the lost, and sooner or later, everyone answers. Even the ones who think they've already escaped. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Fish Lake National Forest. I'm James Anderson, and I was 34 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The whole trip was supposed to be a reset. After Sarah left, after the divorce papers were signed, after months of sleeping on my brother's couch, I'd finally scraped together enough money for a used RV. Nothing fancy, a 1998 Winnebago with more rust than paint and a generator that wheezed like an old man climbing stairs. But it was mine, and it meant freedom from the suffocating sympathy of friends who didn't know what to say anymore. Rex, my 3-year-old German shepherd, seemed as eager to leave the city behind as I was. He'd been restless lately, pacing the apartment, whining at nothing I could see. The vet said he was fine, just picking up on my stress. Dogs do that, she said. They're sensitive to their owner's emotional state. I chose Fish Lake National Forest in Utah because it was remote enough that I wouldn't have to make small talk with other campers, but not so isolated that cell service was completely non-existent. The plan was simple. Find a dispersed camping spot, park the RV for a week, and figure out what came next in my life. Maybe do some fishing, read the stack of books I'd been meaning to get to, let Rex run free in the wilderness. The drive from Salt Lake City took longer than expected. My GPS kept losing signal once we hit the mountain roads, the screen flickering between recalculating route and complete blackness. I'd printed MapQuest directions as backup, old school but reliable, except the ink had somehow smeared during the drive, making half the text illegible. By the time we reached what I thought was the right turnoff, the sun was already sinking behind the pine trees. The dirt road I followed looked promising at first. Recent tire tracks suggested other vehicles had been through, and the Forest Service markers indicated we were in the right area for dispersed camping. But after 20 minutes of bumping along increasingly rough terrain, the tracks disappeared, and I realized I hadn't seen a trail marker in miles. Rex had been unusually quiet during the drive, which should have been my first warning. Normally, he'd have his head out the window, ears flapping, tongue hanging out in pure joy. Instead, he sat rigid in the passenger seat, ears pricked forward, staring intently at the forest sliding past us. "What's got you spooked, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. His fur felt damp with nervous sweat. I found what seemed like a decent spot just as full darkness settled over the forest. A small clearing surrounded by towering aspens and Douglas firs, with enough space to park the RV and set up a campfire. No cell signal, but that was expected. The silence was absolute. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no sounds of civilization at all. Just the whisper of wind through the branches and the distant hoot of an owl. Setting up camp by flashlight wasn't ideal, but I managed to get the RV leveled and the awning extended. Rex stayed close to my heels the entire time, which was unusual. Normally, he'd be off exploring, marking territory, chasing small creatures through the underbrush. Instead, he pressed against my legs, occasionally emitting low whines that seemed to have no cause. "It's just a new place," I told him, though his behavior was starting to make me uneasy too. "We'll both feel better in the morning." I tried to start a campfire. I'd bought a bundle of wood at the last gas station and there was plenty of dry kindling around the clearing, but the matches kept going out before the tinder caught, even though there was barely any wind. When I finally got a small flame going, it burned with a strange blue tinge that made everything look sickly and wrong. Rex growled. It wasn't his usual warning growl when he spotted a raccoon or heard an unfamiliar sound. This was deeper, more primal, the kind of sound wolves make when they sense a predator. I followed his gaze but saw nothing beyond the circle of firelight except black trees and deeper shadows. "Easy, Rex," I said, but my own voice sounded strained. The fire died down to coals despite my efforts to keep it burning. Each time I added wood, the flames would flare briefly, then settle into that unsettling blue glow. Eventually, I gave up and retreated to the RV. Rex followed immediately, seeming as eager as I was to have walls between us and whatever was out there in the dark. The RV's interior felt cramped after the open space outside, but also reassuringly solid. I heated up a can of chili on the propane stove while Rex curled up on the floor, though I noticed his ears remained alert, swiveling toward sounds I couldn't hear. I tried to read, but found myself glancing out the windows every few minutes. Not that I could see much, just the vague shapes of trees and the dying embers of the campfire. At some point, I must have dozed off in the dinette booth with the book open on my chest. I woke to Rex's growling. The sound was continuous now, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the RV's floor. He was standing at the front window, hackles raised, staring intently at something outside. When I joined him, pressing my face to the glass, I saw what had caught his attention. The shadows were moving, not the normal movement of shadows cast by branches swaying in the wind. These moved independently, flowing across the ground like liquid darkness. Some were shaped like people, tall, thin figures that walked with an odd, stilted gait. Others seemed to be animals, though no animals I could identify. They moved in complete silence, circling the RV at a distance that kept them just at the edge of visibility. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, looked again. The shadows were still there, still moving. Rex's growls grew louder. It's just the fire," I whispered, though the fire had died hours ago. "Just tricks of light." But there was no light. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and my campfire was nothing but cold ash. Yet the shadows continued their silent dance around our camp. I grabbed a flashlight and switched it on, aiming the beam where I'd seen the figures. Nothing, just trees and empty ground. But when I turned the light off, they reappeared immediately, as if they'd only been waiting for darkness to return. Rex pressed against my legs, trembling. I'd never seen him scared before. Not of thunderstorms, not of fireworks, not even of the aggressive pit bull that had cornered us last month in the city. But now he was genuinely terrified, and that scared me more than the shadows. I spent the rest of the night sitting by the window with the flashlight in my hand, turning it on whenever the shadows seemed to venture too close to the RV. Each time the light drove them back, but they always returned when darkness fell again. Rex never stopped growling, a low, continuous sound that eventually became as unsettling as the shadows themselves. Dawn came slowly, the forest emerging from black to gray to pale gold as the sun filtered through the canopy. The shadows retreated with the darkness, fading until they were just normal patches of shade beneath the trees. Rex finally relaxed, his hackles settling, his breathing returning to normal. In daylight, everything looked ordinary, peaceful even. Birds sang in the branches, a squirrel chattered somewhere nearby, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves. I felt foolish about my nighttime fears. just stress and exhaustion playing tricks on me. Rex had probably been reacting to my anxiety. Dogs were sensitive that way. I made coffee and sat outside in the morning sun, trying to convince myself that nothing unusual had happened. Just shadows and an overactive imagination. But when I walked to where the campfire had been, I found something that made my stomach clench with renewed unease. Footprints. Dozens of them, circling the cold fire pit in a perfect ring. They were human in shape, but wrong in proportion. Too long, too narrow, with what looked like claw marks where toes should be. The prints were pressed deep into the earth, as if whatever made them carried incredible weight. Rex sniffed at the prints briefly, then backed away with a sharp whine. His reluctance to investigate further told me everything I needed to know. Whatever had left these tracks, it wasn't human. I should have packed up and left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming that we needed to get out of this place. But leaving felt like surrender, like admitting I'd been broken by my divorce, by my failures, by everything that had gone wrong in my life. I'd come here to prove I could handle being alone, and running away after one strange night felt like the ultimate defeat. So I stayed. I spent the day trying to make the campsite feel normal. I organized my supplies, set up a proper camp chair, even rigged a clothesline between two trees. Rex seemed calmer in the daylight, though he stayed close to the RV and refused to venture into the surrounding forest. When I threw a stick for him to fetch, he'd chase it only as far as the tree line before turning back with visible reluctance. As afternoon wore into evening, my anxiety returned. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, and soon it would be dark again. I gathered enough firewood to last the night, determined to keep a strong fire burning this time. Maybe the problem was simply that I'd let the flames die too low. The second night was worse. The fire burned normally at first, with proper yellow flames that cast reassuring light around the campsite. Rex and I sat close to the warmth, and for a while, I felt like maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Just new place jitters combined with an overstimulated imagination. But as the fire began to settle into coals, that blue tinge returned. And with it came the shadows. They were bolder now, venturing closer to the RV, lingering at the very edge of the firelight. I could see them more clearly, and what I saw made my mouth go dry with fear. They were definitely shaped like people, but stretched and distorted, as if someone had taken human silhouettes and pulled them like taffy. Their movements were jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Rex's growling had returned, but now it was punctuated by sharp barks of alarm. Whatever he was seeing, it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and played the beam across the clearing. The shadows vanished instantly, but in that brief moment of illumination, I saw something that made me question my sanity. Standing just beyond the fire's reach was a figure. Not a shadow this time, but something solid and real. It looked like a person, but wrong in ways that made my brain hurt to process. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung past its knees and a face that seemed to shift and blur whenever I tried to focus on it. When the flashlight beam hit it, the thing didn't disappear like the shadows. Instead, it turned toward me with a movement so fluid it seemed boneless. And it smiled. The smile was the worst part. Too wide, stretching from ear to ear, filled with too many teeth. It held the expression for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough for the image to burn itself permanently into my memory, then melted backward into the darkness like smoke. Rex had gone silent, pressing himself against the ground in a submissive posture I'd never seen from him before. When I tried to coax him toward the RV, he wouldn't move, wouldn't even respond to his name. He just lay there, trembling, staring at the spot where the thing had been. I had to carry him inside. The rest of the night was a nightmare of watching and waiting. The shadows moved constantly now, no longer maintaining their distance. They pressed against the RV's windows, flowing over the glass like dark water. Occasionally, I'd see faces in them. Human faces twisted into expressions of hunger or rage or something worse than either. Around 3 a.m., something began scratching at the door. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, scritch, 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 like fingernails dragging across metal. Rex had recovered enough to growl again, but he made no move toward the door. If anything, he seemed to be trying to burrow underneath the dinette bench. The scratching moved to the windows, a sound that set my teeth on edge. I kept the flashlight ready but didn't turn it on. Somehow, I knew that seeing what was making those sounds would be worse than just hearing them. Then I heard my name. James. The voice came from just outside the RV, barely audible through the walls. It sounded like Sarah, like my ex-wife calling to me from the darkness. James, please, I'm lost. My hand moved toward the door handle before my brain caught up. Sarah was 300 miles away in Salt Lake City. Sarah had made it very clear she never wanted to see me again. Whatever was outside wearing her voice wasn't her. Help me, James. I'm so cold. The voice was perfect, right down to the slight rasp Sarah got when she was tired. If I hadn't known it was impossible, I would have opened the door without hesitation. Even knowing it wasn't really her, part of me wanted to believe. Rex's growls had turned to whimpers. He was staring at me with an expression of desperate pleading, as if begging me not to listen to the voice outside. I know you're in there, James. Why won't you help me? The voice was changing now, becoming petulant and angry. It was still Sarah's voice, but with an undertone of malice that she'd never possessed. Something that hated me was wearing her voice like a mask. I sat in the dark RV until dawn, listening to that thing outside where the voices of everyone I'd ever cared about. My mother, my brother, childhood friends, co-workers, each one perfect in timbre and inflection, each one pleading for help or expressing disappointment in my cowardice. When the sun finally rose, the voices stopped. The shadows retreated, and I discovered that something had carved symbols into the RV's exterior walls during the night. They weren't like any writing I'd ever seen, angular marks that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. They covered every surface I could see, etched deep into the metal and fiberglass. When I tried to photograph them with my phone, the images came out blurred and distorted, as if the camera couldn't properly focus on the marks. Rex refused to leave the RV that morning. When I opened the door, he backed away from the threshold with a whine of pure terror. I couldn't blame him. The symbols had an unsettling effect on me, too, making my vision blur and my head ache if I looked at them too long. I should have left then. Should have hitched up the RV and driven straight back to civilization without stopping. But something was wrong with the engine. It turned over but wouldn't catch, no matter how many times I tried. The gauge showed a full tank of gas, the battery was fine, all the connections looked solid. It just wouldn't start. Worse, I was no longer sure I could find my way back to the main road. My GPS had completely given up, showing nothing but a blank screen. My phone had no signal, not even the single bar I'd had when I first arrived. And those printed directions were now completely illegible, the ink having somehow dissolved into abstract smears. I was trapped. The third night, they came inside. I'd barricaded the door as best I could, wedging chairs against it and stacking supplies to create additional barriers. It didn't matter. The shadows flowed under the door like liquid, pooling on the floor before rising into those impossible shapes. Rex had stopped growling. He lay on his side, breathing rapidly, eyes rolling white with terror. When I tried to comfort him, his body was rigid and cold, as if he was going into shock. The shadow things moved through the RV with the confidence of invited guests, examining everything with what seemed like casual curiosity. They touched my belongings with fingers that left no prints but somehow made everything they brushed feel contaminated. When they looked at me, their faces were blank expanses of darkness, but I could feel their attention like a physical weight. One of them approached Rex where he lay on the floor. It knelt beside him, the movement eerily graceful, and reached out with one elongated hand. When it touched his fur, Rex convulsed once and went completely still. No! I grabbed the flashlight and switched it on, playing the beam across the shadow figure. It looked up at me with sudden interest, and for a moment its blank face seemed to develop features. Eyes like black holes, a mouth that opened too wide. The light drove it back, but only temporarily. As soon as I turned off the flashlight to conserve the batteries, it returned to Rex's motionless form. I spent hours in a desperate game of keep away, using the light to drive them off whenever they got too close. But the flashlight was dying, its beam growing dimmer with each use. And there were so many of them now, pressing in from every direction. When the light finally failed completely, they swarmed over me. Their touch was ice cold and somehow oily, leaving trails of numbness wherever they brushed against my skin. They didn't hurt me exactly, but they were changing me. I could feel it happening, something fundamental in my nature being altered, rewritten, corrupted. I don't remember much of what happened next. Images come to me in fragments, being lifted, carried through walls as if they were made of smoke, deposited in a place that existed outside normal space. The landscape there defied description. Impossible geometries, colors that had no names, distances that changed depending on how you measured them. And I wasn't alone. Others were there, people who'd wandered into the wrong places at the wrong times. They stood in silent rows, faces blank, eyes empty of everything that had once made them human. Some looked recent, still wearing hiking clothes and camping gear. Others seemed to have been there much longer, their clothing rotted to rags, their skin taking on the gray pallor of the shadow things themselves. I joined their ranks. How long I stood there, I can't say. Time moved differently in that place, if it moved at all. I was aware of my body, could feel my heart beating and my lungs drawing breath, but my mind had been hollowed out, filled with something else's thoughts and desires. Sometimes I was sent back to the world I'd known, but not as myself. I became one of them, one of the shadow things that haunted dark places and lonely campsites. I remember stalking through forests, pressing against RV windows, whispering with stolen voices to lure the unwary. And I remember the terrible hunger that drove us, not for food, but for something more essential, for the spark of consciousness that made humans what they were. We consumed it slowly, savoring each drop of stolen humanity until our victims were empty shells, ready to join our ranks. But something went wrong. Or maybe something went right. Rex was there in that shadow place, moving through the ranks of the mindless with purpose and determination. He looked the same, but different. Still my dog, but more than a dog now. When he reached me, he pressed his nose against my hand, and suddenly I could think again. The connection between us, forged over years of companionship, had survived even this transformation. His love for me, his loyalty, had become something powerful enough to pierce the veil of shadow magic. "Good boy," I whispered, and the words came out in my own voice instead of the hollow whisper the shadows used. Rex barked once, a sound of pure joy, and suddenly we were running. Not with our legs, but with something deeper, following paths between realities that Rex somehow knew how to navigate. Behind us, I could hear the shadows shrieking in rage and pursuit. But Rex was faster, his determination pulling us both towards something I couldn't see but could feel waiting. Home. We emerged back into the real world in a place I didn't recognize. Not the campsite where this all began, but somewhere else entirely. A parking lot behind a gas station, the kind of generic nowhere place that existed at the intersection of highways. Rex materialized first, solid and real and blessedly normal. I came after, stumbling and gasping, my human flesh feeling strange and unfamiliar after however long I'd been something else. The RV was there too, though I had no memory of driving it. The engine started on the first try. My phone showed full signal. The GPS worked perfectly, offering multiple routes back to Salt Lake City. I drove home without stopping, Rex sitting in the passenger seat like nothing had ever happened. But I could see the knowledge in his eyes, the memory of what we'd experienced together. He'd saved me, pulled me back from something worse than death. That was 6 months ago. We live in an apartment now, in the middle of the city where there are always lights and people and sounds of normal life. Rex seems content enough, though he's never quite returned to his old self. He's more watchful now, more protective. Sometimes I catch him staring at shadows with the same intensity he showed in those woods, and I wonder if he's seeing something I can't. And sometimes in the corner of my eye, I think I see them too, the shadow things, moving just outside my peripheral vision, always just out of sight when I turn to look directly. They feel familiar, like old friends or forgotten family members, and there's a part of me that wants to follow them back to that place between worlds. That's the worst part, the thing that keeps me awake at night. A piece of me is still there, still one of them. I can feel it stirring sometimes, especially in the dark hours before dawn, whispering about the hunger and the hunt and the sweet taste of stolen souls. Rex helps. When the whispers get too loud, he presses against my legs just like he did in the RV, and the touch of his warm, living fur reminds me who I am, who I choose to be. But I'm not entirely human anymore. I know this with the same certainty that I know my own name. Something fundamental was changed during those days in the shadow realm, something that can't be undone. I eat normal food and sleep in a normal bed and go through the motions of a normal life, but underneath it all, I'm something else now. Something hungry. The shadow things haven't given up on reclaiming me. They follow at a distance, always just out of sight, waiting for me to weaken or for my connection to Rex to fade. Sometimes I find their symbols carved into the walls of my apartment building, and I know they're getting closer. I've started looking into other cases, other people who've encountered things in the wilderness that shouldn't exist. There are more than you'd think. Stories buried in forum posts and police reports filed under missing persons or animal attacks. Patterns emerge when you know how to look for them. Unexplained disappearances. People who return from camping trips fundamentally changed. Witnesses who describe shadows moving independently of any light source. Rex and I hunt them now. Not the shadow things themselves. I'm not sure they can actually be destroyed. But the places where they break through into our world. Old campsites, abandoned cabins, stretches of wilderness where the barriers between realities have worn thin. We map them, document them, try to warn others away. It's not much, but it's something. A purpose. A way to fight back against the hunger that still whispers in the dark corners of my mind. Because I know now that Fish Lake National Forest was just the beginning. There are other places, other forests, other dark spaces where things that should stay hidden have learned to hunt. And there are people like me. People who were touched by the shadows and managed to find their way back but brought something else with them in return. We're the canaries in the coal mine. The early warning system for a kind of invasion that most people don't even know is possible. The shadows are spreading, growing bolder, finding new ways to cross over into our world. And sometimes when the hunger gets really bad, I wonder if we're fighting them, or helping them. Rex is getting old. His muzzle has gone gray, and he moves more slowly than he used to. What will happen when he's gone? What will happen to the part of me he keeps anchored to humanity? I try not to think about it, but the questions won't leave me alone. Sometimes I catch myself researching animal lifespans, Googling symptoms of canine aging, looking for ways to extend his life. But deep down, I know that when Rex finally dies, I'll have a choice to make. I can try to stay human on my own, fighting against the shadow nature that lives inside me with nothing but willpower and stubbornness. Or I can let go, let myself slip back into that place between worlds where nothing hurts and nothing matters except the hunt. Most days I think I'll choose humanity. But in the dark hours before dawn, when the whispers are loudest and the shadows longest, I'm not so sure. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from Fish Lake National Forest. But I'm beginning to suspect that's the wrong question entirely. The right question is, what if it didn't follow me home? What if I brought it with me on purpose,